So it's a little bit after 9, so I want to call to order the meeting of the Audit Committee for December 8th of 2022. And just again, as usual, I just want to thank everybody for attending today and to wish everybody an early happy holidays. So with that, roll call.
Okay, calling roll, Audit Committee Chairman Michael Abuzarol,
Here.
Keith Lippman, Trevor McLear, Salvador Talarico, Fiscal Officer Michael Chambers.
Here.
Okay.
Okay, great. So item 3, the public comment. If there's anybody from the public who wants to comment on anything from the agenda. There's some new faces here. I don't know if they must, or I think they're new faces. I'm not sure. You want to introduce the new faces? Huh? Aren't they two new faces? Yeah. Oh, okay.
Director of Operations for the Fiscal Office.
Sorry, I thought you knew each other. Okay.
Now I do. I know. Sorry about that. My eyes are going bad as I'm getting older. All right. So item 4, we need a motion to approve the minutes from the September 8th, 2022 meeting. All right. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Okay, perfect.
Aye.
Next item is executive session, so we're going to push this one off to the end of the meeting. So item 6A, the follow-up items in the third quarter meeting. Monica?
Yeah, I need to get. Okay, the follow-up items is Lee. Here we go. I just realized Lee wasn't here. So fiscal office, the responsible party is fiscal office Lee. Bank reconciliation, this has been a recurring item. We're going to be addressing this item in agenda item 6B. The next item is the prosecutor's office. This also has been a recurring item, and it's the audit committee requests from the prosecutor's office relative to jurisdictional review. We're going to be addressing this item in agenda item 6C. The next item is for myself and Alexa Villa of the Office of Inspector General. There was a request by the audit committee for the Office of Inspector General to do a presentation to the committee at the request of the OIG. It was not included at this meeting, but we are trying to have her come speak at the next agenda meeting. I did speak with her, and she said she would be prepared for that first quarter meeting to talk about the full scope of responsibilities versus just the ethics as per the request of Chairman Abuzarol. Next item is the committee to readdress recommended revisions for Cuyahoga County Charter. That will be addressed in agenda item 6E. Next one is the review of the OIG loan development update report by DIA as a follow-up to the inquiry made at a QUATE presentation. This item has been also a recurring one. I spoke with Alexa in terms of the OIG's loan development update report. She said she has been briefed by her team, verbally briefed by her team and internally, and is good with all of the open follow-up items. She will not be reissuing that report. That report had a limited distribution. And so what I am recommending, if you will give us an opportunity when we go over our audit plan, this actual item has come up as time for us to actually do our review of it. So I'm thinking that this item may be addressed if you are okay with us proceeding with the audit plan for 2023. That item is on that audit plan. And so this would make this report kind of irrelevant at that time. Next item is update audit manual for policy and procedures. The updates were made. There was a copy in the agenda and the meeting material sent to you. If anyone has any questions, please let me know. Okay, great. So that item should be closed out. The audit committee requested the director to review proposed remote work policy. I did do the review and feedback, and I completed that in email on 9/14 of '22. That is also on the agenda, and it is agenda item 6F. Next, there is the provide response to the IA of action taken by AC relative to independence concern and provide proposed charter revisions. I, at the direction of the audit committee, sent an email to the IA on 9/13 and forwarded that same email to the audit committee on 10/14, and that is agenda item 6E. Lastly, we have provide update on meetings with Council Member Sweeney and Schroen. And I met with Council Member Sweeney. In fact, our entire team met with Council Member Sweeney on 9/14/22. He just wanted to meet the team and get a feel for who we were. As a note of importance from that meeting and outcome, internal audit now has their name on the placard by the elevator. We didn't have that before. When he came to visit us, he didn't quite know where we were. And so he's like, why aren't you listed? And we said, well, we've just never been. It's just been a well-kept secret. So the secret's not well-kept anymore. He has made it so that we are now visible on the placard. So thank you, Councilmember Sweeney. And then Councilmember Schroen has not set a meeting date yet. So we're still looking to see if he's interested in meeting with us. Any questions, concerns?
So Mark, the only question I had is the second last one with the IIA. Have they provided any feedback to you after you sent them?
They have not. It's just kind of gone dead, which is a good thing. I think they're just waiting for us to, when we said, I told them it would be a while, it was going to take a process. And so I guess by the next time they review us, if that's so the committee's desire that we go through that process with them again, then they would probably address it at that point.
Any other questions on the follow-up items? Okay, great. So item 6B, the bank reconciliation. So I'll turn this over to Lee.
Good morning. At the end of last year for 2021, we hadn't fully reconciled our accounts and we had a unreconciled amount of over $2 million. That has been resolved and we wrote off the $2.2 million at the end of August. And so that period, of course, if everyone remembers, just as a reminder, the $2.2 million went back as far as at least 2014. So that has been resolved, and we're reconciled fully with no reconciling items completely through July 31st, 2022. We're currently working on August 2022 at this point, and we have two accounts that are not completely reconciled, which is our payroll account and our accounts payable account. Now, those are the bulk of the transactions. So, but the other, I think it's 39 accounts have been reconciled fully. But until we get those last two accounts reconciled, it's not considered a complete reconciliation. We expect to have that reconciliation done within the next week or so, but we do have a staff that's out with COVID, and that is the person that's mainly responsible for the reconciliation, and then we have a second member who's out sick as well, who's performing the account reconciliation. We hope to have the accounts reconciled through at least November by the beginning of January. And of course, we're always a month in arrears. So December, if we were on target, we would have December's 2022's reconciliation completed by the end of January. We don't expect to have any additional write-off amounts because we are reconciled through the current process. So I'll stop for a second and allow you guys to ask questions regarding the reconciliations.
Lee, I do have a question, just to be clear. When you say you have no reconciling items?
That is correct.
So like absolutely
So when I
none?
say that, okay, let me
Be
back up.
very clear.
Anything that's considered an item that's outstanding, we have identified. So what the difference is the $2.2 million that we had that was considered an unreconciled item, we didn't know what it was. So anything that's on the books that's listed as a difference between bank and book have been thoroughly identified. So that's what I mean when I say we have no reconciling items. We have no unidentified reconciling items, to correct the record. Thank you, Monica.
Can you just
Mm-hmm.
describe the difference between what I'll call resolved?
Okay.
Are these still identified but open, trying to?
Some of most of the items have been identified and cleared. A lot of the items are book versus bank differences that might be something like interest or where a transaction was recorded, like a memo transaction might have been recorded backwards by the Treasury Department. So if, for example, if we had a returned item and Treasury recorded to, they recorded it as revenue when it should have been like a debit, then we've corrected it. So we try to keep that up to date.
I think I understand.
Mm-hmm.
It should only be a matter of
Booking the entry.
time to
Correct.
let that happen.
We've cleared the transactions through June, but we haven't cleared the July identified transactions. So if something was considered as identified in July, we haven't posted those transactions yet. So, yeah. So we tried, once the items have been identified, we work very hard to get that, those transactions recorded in the following month, in the preceding month. So, by the time we get done reconciling August, those transactions won't be posted for November's closing because we closed November yesterday. So they'll be posted in time for December's closing. So until we're up to date, it's gonna always be a lag.
I'm not being critical, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to wrap my brain around it.
Yep.
If you have could aggregate a large amount of our books are off. Do you have any way of knowing?
The dollar amount is? No, I can get that number to you, though. But at this point, I do not know how much it is. But I can find out and let you know. Mm-hmm.
Lee, I just want to express my gratitude. The
Thanks,
reports
Al.
on reconciliations have changed quite a bit in the last 2 years, and I appreciate all the work you
Thank
did
you.
to get us to this point.
Thank you.
Lee, you and your team.
Thank you.
Can you also tell them how you have someone daily looking at the current,
Yes.
so it's not
So
like
one of
we're
the things
always...
that helped is we do have, and this is a result of the ERP system, that it allows us to automatically match transactions versus manually matching transactions, and somebody is doing that on a daily basis, where somebody in the past, because it was a manual process, and we have such a high volume, it took like really literally weeks to match transactions, like approximately 6 to 8 weeks. Now we're doing it daily, so it doesn't take as long. We get a bank file. We don't have to wait till the end of the month for the bank to send us something for us to manually match the transactions. We get a daily file from the bank, so that does help. We still have some challenges, but we're getting there. Any additional questions regarding the bank rec? No? Okay.
Mr. Mackler, I think.
Are you done with your whole, what's the status of
Yeah.
the work by the consultant?
Oh, they're still assisting us with this. They're going to actually be here in February or March, depending on their schedule, to give us some additional training on how to better automate our processes. They're coming in February. So we did an extension because the contract was supposed to go through December of 2022. We extended it to December of 2023. There's a no-cost extension, but we hopefully will be done with them by mid-June, but they're helping us with some other things as well. But the part that's related to CTM and the bank reconciliation, we hope to be completed by June.
What have they done so far?
They've walked us through what are best practices. We're still doing a lot of manual transactions. So one of the things that really helped us a lot was the way we were booking like transactions that are like on they're basically on the bank side. And I'll use interest because that's the simplest transaction to understand, where the bank is giving us interest earnings on our account. We were basically booking that wrong, and he taught us how to do that transaction as an adjustment. So it didn't really involve anything. It was a big manual process that they were doing, and he automated that process for us, because we were doing something that was totally, it basically was outside the system, and it created a lot of errors on our part, and it required a lot of man hours to correct those transactions. So he showed us how to get the file from the bank and where it would be automated.
Would it be possible to send to us the kind of the scope of services of what this
Yep.
consultant's supposed to be doing? I guess maybe it'd be helpful for me to just kind of understand ultimately what the outcome is, and maybe if there's a timeline, maybe a revised timeline for their work.
And just an FYI, the scope of service does include other things other than the bank reconciliation, but that is the biggest part of it. But I'll send it to you.
It was a little bit my understanding that they couldn't necessarily perform the bulk of their work until you were caught up on the reconciliations.
That is, well, I wouldn't, they couldn't teach us how to fully automate it. Well, I shouldn't say they couldn't teach us. They couldn't help us fully automate it until we were caught up. But I think we're caught up enough that it still made a big impact. But yes, that's the timeline for the February and March timeline, because that's when we think we'll be completely reconciled. And that's when they're going to come in and give us some training for a week or two to implement to show us the remaining processes that we need to do. But when they said we needed to be caught up, that is why they're doing the training in February and March, and that they haven't come in before.
Mr. Chair, just for the record, on Tuesday at the council meeting, the fiscal officer requested the 2.3 million general fund appropriation to actually complete the write-off. So I think that is the final step that was needed for the
Well,
fiscal.
we were gonna wait to the end to see if we could cover it somehow, but
Yeah.
we didn't
So,
have enough.
correct. So we had already written it off in August, but we wanted to make sure we had enough appropriation so that our books wouldn't be out of whack.
So just out of curiosity, so that generally means the county council, in a different way, kind of approve
Yeah.
through the appropriation approval, not necessarily the write-off?
That's correct. Yeah, they approved it on Tuesday through what we commonly refer to as the fiscal agenda. So the fiscal officer requested those funds.
The law director said I did have the right to write it, but I needed the appropriation, so it's actually kind of a double check, I guess, yeah, double approval.
Any other questions for Lee?
All righty.
Thank you.
And that, Mike, will help with the encumbrance issue that we typically have.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Alrighty, so item 6C, the Audit Committee Jurisdictional Subcommittee update work. So again, just a couple of comments from my perspective. So this again has been one of those long-standing agenda items, and subcommittee met again, and I think we're ultimately going to present something that at least the subcommittee group considers to be kind of a final deliverable for this. This has been a little bit difficult because, the jurisdiction, I guess the interpretation of our jurisdiction has changed and evolved over the period of time when we started this initiative. So anyways, there's a couple of documents that Mark and maybe Monica will be going over. So I'll turn it over to Mark or Monica.
You can go first. Mhm.
Thank you, yes, Mr. Chairman. The committee, with the assistance of the chairman, and spoke about the direction we were going, kind of where we were going with how we understood the question we were trying to answer. And Yvette provided some clarity to simplify things. It is a pretty big undertaking, the number of entities and related entities and associated entities that are affiliated with the county, and kind of weeding through them and identifying what constitutes an entity of county government for purposes of Article 11 of the Charter. And we were really diving deep and looking at certain functions and different aspects of these entities. And Yvette kind of clarified that that's really not the question that she had. It was more of a broad-based, quick reference high-level look at what these different entities are. So I took a broad brush and characterized them under the different standards that have been articulated by the Attorney General and the courts to identify what constitutes a county body. And as the chairman alluded to, there are a number of different layers to this question on what entity is eligible to receive audit committee services, what entities are obligated to submit to audit committee services. But this question is limited strictly to what the charter means when it says that the Internal Audit Committee provides services to agencies of the county funded in whole and part by the county. It's the county officers, departments, institutions, boards, commissions, authorities, organizations, and agencies of county government. So after our meeting in our conference kind of early November, I produced this quick little reference guide that lays out the different standards that are applicable to determine or assessing how to classify the Adams Board or Metro Health, or there's, I think, 30 different entities listed on the backside of this memo that clarifies or gives a quick basic classification for what these are. That's not to say that there aren't nuances and contours to this. It's a complex question, and it's not to say that there couldn't be agreed upon procedures or some limited scope of an audit that could be performed on these entities, whether voluntarily or otherwise. So this is meant to be a reference guide, but not a kind of a user-friendly quick check. If there's questions, we can get into the work papers and kind of dive deep into the different apparatuses. But this is what how I understood Yvette describing the problem and my answer to the question as she presented it. If you have any questions or you want to discuss any specific ones, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have a question. I'm not sure if it's Monica's or you, Mark. So these agencies that we have the big red no next to, are they audited by some other entity, whether it be the Auditor of State's office or their own independent audit, or are they just simply unaudited?
They are audited by the Auditor of State. They are an external audit. They do not receive internal audit services from, as far as I know, they may receive internal audit service, I don't know, but their financial statements are audited.
And are they audited independently of the county or as part of the county?
Yes, an independent public accountant, either the Auditor of State's is considered an independent public auditor or public IPA. And also they can contract that out to private, the auditor can hire IPAs to perform that audit.
I'm just trying to get to the point. Do you know what I'm saying,
Yes,
Monica? Are they audited as
if I may.
part of our audit or
Okay,
their own?
so if I may, the items, the areas that on here are identified as a no. When we look at our audit population, they are excluded from our audit population. So when we talk about the risk assessment, you'll see that these areas are not within our realm of looking at for our purposes of auditing. So they're not audited by us. There are some that are subject to external audit, some that are subject to state audit. Doesn't mean that the state auditor actually performs that audit, but they could be performed, like the Board of Elections. The state could perform that. The Board of Development, Disabilities, to my knowledge, I'm not certain if anyone actually looks at them. I don't believe, to my knowledge, they actually have an internal audit function. So unless they have some external services that they procure, then they would not. And so in my next thing, what we are recommending, we did somewhat of a a risk assessment of these entities to Cuyahoga County, and we're going to be making recommendations to management as to how they may decide to provide oversight to these areas, should they deem it appropriate according to the risks that we think they pose or create to the county.
So let me ask specifically, because I'm not sure, either I'm not expressing my question correctly, or maybe it's just not understood, but.
Can I try to answer it? Many of these are within the reporting entity of the counties. They're included within their CAFR, so they would
Okay.
just go over the overall scope of how they're auditing the county. Many of these are in that.
Many of them, okay. So my question was going to be, you brought up the Board of Elections. Do they have their own IPA or Auditor of State engagement? Do they have their own audit report and management letter issued? It sounds like no.
Not to my knowledge.
If I could perhaps try to clarify terms, and
Yes.
there's probably a question. When we use the term audit, independent audit, often that refers to an audit of the financial statements, which is very different than internal audit procedures that would be part of an engagement where it initiated by your department. So if there is a need to answer the question that's being asked, are they audited, we really ought to differentiate between that financial statement audit, which is designed to determine whether the financial statements are materially correct,
Represented, yeah.
versus our good controls in place and being followed.
So I understand that, Keith. When my experience with either the Auditor of State's office or their designated IPA is they review more than just the financial statements. They review internal controls and they review compliance with laws. So are these groups being reviewed by someone on an annual basis when it comes to, are they having an external audit, whether it's part of the county or independently on their own?
Mr. Chair, if I can add, I think, to where Sal's going, some of them, yes, they have their own independent audits, separate of the county. The courts, the Board of Elections, they are part of the county's external audit. But Metro Health, they have their own. Adams Board, they have their own. So it's not a clear answer for each one. Some of them are part of the county's audit, some of them are not.
You answered. Thank you, Trevor.
And just to piggyback off what Trevor said, any entity that falls under the county, like Adams Board, Board of Developmental Disabilities, they are part of our external audit process. I can also speak for Metro Health and RTA. They have their own external audit as well. So I think basically every entity on there, I don't know about the redistricting commission, well, that's us, but most of the items on there that I'm looking at, I'm not clear about the sports commission, but most of those entities on there, even though they're marked as no, they do have an external audit that's performed.
Thank you.
Okay. Go to the next. Same document, just scroll down. Tried to make it easier. Yeah. Okay, so we did quite a bit of work relative to this jurisdiction. Mark and myself, as well as some other people in the fiscal office, like the director of OBM, we took information that we were able to gather, such as budgets, statutory, discretionary items in terms of funding. We tried to classify them in terms of funding. We also tried to identify those that we had some exposure, the county had exposure to through debt debentures or financial guarantees. we also looked at procurement in terms of any procurement agreements and arrangements. So this document kind of outlines all of what we could gather from an informational perspective. Based upon that, we looked at all of the information, and I assigned a risk rating to each one of these entities, and then made some recommendation for management oversight. That would be the fiscal and executive office, not the audit committee. And so this is just a recommended document that we are recommending in terms of how we think the organization can appropriately provide maybe additional oversight in the areas that are deemed to be excluded from our purview in terms of our audit horizon, our audit, so that we don't look at them at all. But these are some things that the county might be able to do if they desire to have additional oversight or insight into the operations of these particular entities.
Mr. Chairman, if I could kind of piggyback on that. A lot of these payments are, some of the risk, I think, is associated with payments to vendors or cutting checks out of the treasury. And those go through the fiscal office, the warrants and vouchers through the auditor to the treasurer that are paying. So you can audit the activity of these entities that you can't directly perform internal audit services by assisting the fiscal office in reviewing those warrants and vouchers for payment. So
We've caught some problems with it,
right.
but it's not perfect, but yeah.
And you want to talk about the detailed listing of the executive agencies that you handed out?
Okay, yes, so I'll just go off of what they have. So included in your packet is the Cuyahoga County Organizational Chart. It lists out the executive agencies, those that are considered to be, if you look at some of the documents we just went over, there's just a general note of executive, the county executive. And so this details out who is included in that category. And so we have, the executive office staff, the chief of staff, and all those underneath him, like safety and protection, which is the sheriff, the clerk of courts, medical examiner, public safety and justice services, consumer affairs, from economic opportunity and growth, health and human services, child and family services, senior adult services, reentry. So this is a listing of all those that are considered to be executive agency only. This also will kind of come back to play when we talk about the audit that we did relative to the payroll, where we, from a scope perspective, Chairman Abuzar asked us to talk later about our scope, and our scope pretty much covered the executive agencies in some instances. So this is relative to the work that we do when we are able to look at items and we talk about executive agency. These are the specific discrete components of what represents the executive agency.
Okay, so let me just kind of summarize this, if I may, so we can get through the agenda. So we have an opinion now from the prosecutor's office that defines what our jurisdiction is over county agencies and what we don't have jurisdiction over. This includes a kind of a broad category of county executive agencies. So this is a detailed list of all the county agency organizations that, based upon the opinion, we have audit jurisdiction over. So I'm assuming your 2023 audit plan and future audit plans will primarily focus on these particular areas. I mean, they'll only include these particular areas that we have jurisdiction over. Is that?
Yes. All of the areas are listed in our risk assessment that are in our audit population, which include these areas. We have them listed out.
And there's a lot of risk, and it's a large list of county executive agencies, of which I'm assuming there's potentially a lot of risk associated with the work that's being performed here. So So even with a lot of entities not being within the audit committee jurisdiction, there certainly are a number of county agencies that are within audit committee jurisdiction. So are we kind of done with this project from the audit committee's perspective? Have we kind of accomplished what we tried to accomplish months ago?
If I could just ask one question. So that list that you held up, as a result, having gone through the process that we have over the last number of meetings in the subcommittee and so forth, has that list changed with regard to the entities that we have considered in our universe of county entities that we assess risk and audit? Having gone through this process, have we added or subtracted?
We have. When Mark first presented this to us last year, we actually made the change to our risk universe when we're doing our risk assessment. So that was for last year. So from when we did the risk assessment for 2022, it changed. There were some areas that we scoped out because they were not within the.
So let me ask you with the follow-on. The list that Mike just held up, the subcommittee has signed off, yes, this is where we're comfortable given the hand we've been dealt. Is that fair to say?
So I think I just want to be very clear here that there are, based upon his list, there are still entities that, based upon what he was asked to do as to whether or not they are within our audit universe, yes, they're within our audit universe and we risk assess them, but then we do have that issue of the additional concerns that have been raised relative to some that are within the universe, but may deem it to be a request versus a compel. So we
Okay,
are including those.
That's helpful. So what are you asking us to sign off on? That's what I'm trying to understand.
I don't know if the board needs to take action, maybe just acknowledge receipt.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything.
Yeah, I'm not looking for any formal approval, because there really are two separate issues here, which we're gonna talk about in a second.
Right.
One is what's within our jurisdiction, and then the second issue is those that are within our jurisdiction, they still have the authority to opt out based upon the opinion from the prosecutor's office, which we're gonna talk about in a second. So I just wanna know that this jurisdictional project and the work that's been done, that we're comfortable with these deliverables, and we won't have to talk about it anymore, if that.
And I just want to thank Mark. Thank you so much. I know it was so difficult at times and very complex.
Yeah, yes, thank you. It is difficult to articulate the ins and outs, and thanks to Monica for helping provide clarity and distill it to its essence and move it off the ball, because I was out in the weeds.
So the next item on the agenda, this kind of dovetails a little bit to what we just talked about, and that's the recommendation for revision to the Cuyahoga County Charter. Again, this has been another kind of a longstanding issue here. So I think for this meeting, Monica is prepared to kind of just talk a little bit about some high-level stuff. She has some information here from Olga, but I think as we're dealing ultimately with some language that we may want to suggest to the Charter Review Commission, there's probably two big issues here that I think we still have to address. One is kind of access to work papers, but the second issue is this whole jurisdiction, right? Because no offense to the prosecutor, I don't agree with the prosecutor's office opinion in regards to, this, if you look at the language and it's in Mark's opinion, the County Audit Committee shall provide internal auditing to assist the county executive. So county agencies have interpreted that language to say, if we don't want your assistance, then we're not going to participate in the audit. This is how I'm paraphrasing it, right? So I do think when we talk about the proposed charter language, I think it's still necessary for us to get clarification on really what that means. shall provide internal auditing to assist still is kind of ambiguous language. I've also asked Monica to reach out to Summit County because I think they have similar charter language and to see what's happening within Summit County. So with that, I'll turn it over to.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure you note that item D, did you mean to skip over
I'm
that?
sorry, I didn't mean to skip over, but we'll skip over it for now.
For now, okay, all right, just want to make sure you're aware. Okay, so in relation to this, this is going to, as you all know, be a heavy lift and take some time and really take some coordination with legal, with counsel, with, I mean, it's a heavy lift to revise or propose revisions to the charter. What we have done to this effect is I have provided this ALGO document, which, gives some really good guidance, I think, as to the areas that need to be encompassed or what a charter needs to do to try to protect our auditor independence. And so I'm not going to go through this. You can it's one-page document. I'm sure you've read that. But the key areas are access to paper, to records and people, and the ability to be able to perform our work without interference. So those are the key, provide the auditor with unrestricted access to records and employees and protect the auditor from interference in their work and personnel decisions. So I think it comes down to that. So we will be working definitely as a unit like we did, probably get a subcommittee if, like we did for the jurisdiction, get together as a couple of different people and try to knock this out, hopefully, sometime next year. As it relates to Summit County, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for making that suggestion. I did reach out to their audit, chief auditor, Lisa Scapern, and I think I'm pronouncing that right. If I'm not, I'm so sorry. But very interesting. We did, both Josh and I did a lot of research. They have a lot of information on their website. So prior to even initiating contact, we went through a lot. At least I know I did, he did too, looking at what they have out there. And she's been with the agency for 20 years. She's been there since the beginning. And so she had a lot of insight. But basically, to sum it up and not take a lot of this committee's time, it all boiled down to when they were initially chartered, they out the gate did a touch point with every single entity. So they pretty much established that authority up front and the expectation for the audit up front. They also develop collaborative work relationships with entities like the courts immediately up front. Per my conversation with her, everybody was on board from the beginning. She may have had one or two holdouts, but when a new judge came in for the probate court, that fell, and since that time, they've been auditing them at will. There was some mention of legal opinions relative to the Board of Elections. They had a hard time initially. The Board of Elections got an opinion from the Attorney General, but that was very kind of restricted and specific to operations. And so their prosecutor's office actually issued opinion saying that they did have the ability to audit as related to anything other than operations, basically, for the financial stuff. But just honestly, she said they don't really, it's not something that they continue because it's not a collaborative relationship, so they don't actually perform that work to this day. The other thing that I thought was very good, a learning thing from us, is they actually go beyond the scope of their authority and reach out to sister kind of, I would just, what you call them, the agencies, well, the work that they do for other third parties. So they do work for people outside of the county, Summit County, and they For those that, oh, this is very also important to know, for those that, like their developmental disabilities, their Adams Board, and their children's services are not considered chartered for them. So they've actually have intergovernmental agreements with them to do audit work, and they bill them back a certain amount each year for work that will be done. So they just have a really good collaborative, that, you know, it's a tone. The tone that was set coming out the box, the culture there is just a little bit different. Here we have a lot of, you know, kind of segmented groups, you know, who like to own their space, and that's doesn't seem to be the case over at Summit County. They work a little bit more holistically and collaboratively as it relates to managing the risk of the organization through the assurance of internal audit.
Do they have the same charter language that we have?
They have this same, there's some modification. This was the modification that she told me about, which is they actually went back and they chartered to make IT a separate thing where IT services are now centralized or go through them. But we already have kind of our IT is centralized, so we don't really kind of need that.
So if Summit County wanted to audit the human resources, or let me get a better example, they wanted to audit the, I don't know, give me an example of
Civil Service Commission.
Adams Board, they would have the, is it because they have the authority, or is it because they have these collaborative relationships?
So for Adams Board, it is a intergovernmental agreement that they have that allows them to do that audit. So they've worked out that agreement with them. For other ones, it's more of a collaborative agreement. Particularly the courts, she mentioned, you know, they don't, and she said when they met with the courts early on, in their original touch point audits that they did, they told them, listen, you don't have to submit to this, but these are the benefits if you do. And so from that point on, they have always just included them in their overall universe and audit them as they audit everybody else. One thing to note, though, is they have a Human Resources Commission versus a PRC, but very equivalent. And that is a little bit different in that ours seems to be a separate independent entity. Theirs is underneath Human Resources. So when they audit Human Resources, they audit their Human Resource Commission. But so they don't have that issue that we are looking at.
Mr. Chair, I think in light of everything going on with the Metro and the board, maybe now would be a good time to reach out to the Adams Board itself, not the people, and see if they'd be willing to allow us in some of these other places. I think with everything going on, you never know, we might be able to get those collaborative agreements voluntarily, unless you think differently.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just, I'm curious, do they bill for their internal audit services, or how do they provide it under their own funding, or do these audit units pay for their internal audit services?
So the three in which they have intergovernmental agreements, which is the Board of Development Disabilities, Adams Board, and their Children's Services, they actually bill back $5,000 a year, which is minimal. I mean, for the services provided. Now, they may or may not audit them every year, but that billing happens every year.
And we have the authority to bill back county agencies. I think early on, we decided not to do that because we didn't want the billing to be a disincentive for the county agencies to participate. But I think we have the.
Correct.
The charter does contemplate interagency transfers for the internal audit services, but in my time, it hasn't been implemented.
That's correct, and that's because of what Mike said. And then if you go back to the minute meetings, the meeting minutes, that is what was decided several years ago, was that they didn't want that to be a hindrance to people accepting the services. So we chose not to bill back.
Technically county entities, it might be something we need to do, to use county resources to provide internal audit services to external entities. it would probably be something we would want to consider undertaking as some sort of reimbursement for those services.
Well, I would be happy to have that come to play, that someone would like us to audit and still trying to build collaborative relationships with all.
You think if we gave it to them free, do we have to charge them? That might be more of an incentive.
Yeah.
Plus, we're doing our due diligence, especially big money.
My concern is if it's not something that the charter tasks the body to perform, that providing it gratuitously might get outside of the authority and be a improper expenditure of county resources to undertake something that's not, authorized. So I'm talking off the cuff here. It's just something.
That's an interesting perspective, but I do understand what you're saying.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I can, I guess, add or comment, I guess I'm not seeing much of a difference between Cuyahoga County and Summit County, right? When juvenile court, it was collaborative, right? They asked internal audit to come in. It was collaborative, right? I guess I'm not seeing, I think the comparison is good, but it's almost the same thing here. Granted, we had some disagreements on the PRC, but they didn't want an audit to be conducted at the time. So I guess I'm not seeing really any difference between the two entities. We went in and audited juvenile court because they asked for it. Just like the independent entities in Summit County, there's 3 agreements. They asked for it.
So Trevor, if I would, the one difference is that right now, when we do our risk assessment, these entities are scoped out. We don't look at them. For them, they build them into their risk assessment because they can audit them without hesitation. They don't have to have a request to audit them. So they just include them as part of their audit universe. That would be the significant difference, is that they are not risk assessed and looked at will. And that's fine, particularly for those that are outside, that is totally fine.
And I would say that's true right now, probably in Summit County, but if there was a new prosecutor or a new administrative judge, I'm not so sure that they would see it the same way either, though, in 2 or 4 years from that time in Summit County. So right now, they have the ability, but we also included a lot of these agencies in our risk assessment over the years.
And
So-
the difference is we never got to audit them, and that's really the crux here with this in terms of the longevity, right? They've been at this for 20 years.
Yes, right.
We're at 10. So maybe in 20 years, we'll get to the point where they are. But they started out the box, and that I really want to make that clear, is the tone was set at the beginning. We're kind of coming behind a little bit, unfortunately, and trying to establish, these collaborative relationships and things. And it's just going to take time. I'm sure, once people see the value in things, and they see that we're not a got you kind of team, that the work we do is valuable. So we're just going to have to continue to let our work speak for ourselves, and hopefully, others will see the value in what we do.
And I
Mr.
think
Chair,
the
can I
other-
ask a follow-up? Did you talk to the director about, like, the Akron Sports Commission and stuff like that? Because, I'm curious, I would be surprised if they audit those authorities.
I
but-
did not. We had about a little over an hour's meeting, and we have agreed to meet more regularly because she learned some things from us and and things that we do. And so we're going to have that ongoing relationship with them. So I will definitely be able to have an opportunity to get further into ask the questions that anyone in this committee would like me to ask.
Thanks, Monica.
You're welcome.
And I think the other big potential issue that we have here is this whole to-assist interpretation. It's happened now with the PRC, but I'm concerned that down the road, entity that we have in a 2023 audit plan that's considered to be a county executive agency can reach out and say to Monica, well, we don't need your assistance, right? So we don't want to have the audit undertaken. And I don't think that exist in Summit County, does it?
It does not, but the executive order, as long as that executive order is in place, there is not an executive agency that can say that. So we would be okay with executive agencies. It's those that are outside executive agency authority that would have that.
I hope you're right. Because
Yeah.
I can see it.
I
can
hope
see it.
I hope I'm right too. I really am.
So for purposes of wrapping up this item on the agenda, so when Monica and whoever is working on coming up with revised charter language, I mean, I think the focus has to be on ensuring independence, access to records, I think is important to put in this proposed language, and, you know, in my opinion, this two assist concept. I think the authority has to be a little bit more specific in the charter. But again, we're gonna, so is there anything else that should be addressed in this proposed charter language?
Not just access to records, but access to management, cooperation personnel.
Yeah, records and employees. And like I said, this ALGA article really does provide you with very good guidance as an audit committee on what would need to be fashioned in order to ensure we have the ability to perform our jobs in conformity with independent standards.
So let me, any other comments on this topic from anybody? Okay, so item D, so the 2022 financial audit pre-meeting. This is just to remind you that this meeting has been scheduled for December 20th at 1 o'clock. Hopefully everybody has it in their calendar. This is an auditor meeting, so this is why we're allowed to do this one via Zoom. So just to remind everybody that you have it in your calendar. Is there anything else?
No, and a meeting notice from Clark Schaefer should be forthcoming.
Okay.
What time?
1 o'clock. There's a calendar hold that I sent to each of you.
Do I recall there were some other calendar holds taken off, or?
No, it's just that one.
That one?
Just
Okay,
that one.
it's there.
Yep. Mhm.
Okay. So item 6F, the discussion of the remote work, we're going to move that to the end of the agenda also after executive session. Item 7A, so is Lee coming back?
Oh,
We'll jump by 7A into Lee. I'm assuming Lee's going to present this?
yeah, she was
Okay.
going to be presenting it.
All right. So item 7B, the review of the audit staff's continuing education credit. So this is just a kind of a requirement for the audit committee to make sure that the staff of internal audit have fulfilled their continuing education requirements based upon the language that we've approved historically. So there's a document that Monica has that she'll go over.
Yeah, so there was a document included. If you have any questions, everyone met their requirements for the year. So if you have any questions, concerns.
Pretty good? Okay. So item 7C, the 2023 risk assessment and the 2023 audit, the 2023 audit plan. So these kind of go hand in hand. So at this meeting, we kind of give, so the audit plan will be presented for 2023. We give kind of general approval associated with it, so they can get going on the work in 2023. And then at the first quarter meeting, if there's any revisions to the audit plan, we'll be formally approving it at that meeting. So with
Correct. So formal approval of the 23 plan where we actually have the document that expands and talks about everything is at the first quarter meeting. This is just giving you guys an opportunity to see what we're thinking about and getting your input for revisions for that final review, for that final presentation in next quarter. But that all is, our audit plan is always per standards based upon our risk assessment. So I'm going to have Jeremy, if you would come up, please, and kind of go through the 23 risk assessment.
Yeah, real quick. I mean, basically, it was just done. We followed the jurisdictional review as we have in the past year or two. We only put in there who was clearly, as determined by that in our audit universe. We followed the same basic methodology as last year. We sent out questionnaires to everyone. Everyone got back in probably record time. It's probably the best we've ever done in the 8 years, I suppose, we've been doing it. So that was fantastic. It's a fairly self-explanatory document. The results came back as they did. It's all, I think, pretty clear. In the back, we put the highest scoring entities, sort of what's driving some of that risk or why they're scoring so high. So essentially, if there's any other questions about the process or the results, we can try to answer those now for any of you. Otherwise, like I said, it's very similar to what we've done in previous years.
And there were no significant outstanding, like people that moved from last year to this year in terms of risk, right?
No, there's always some movement. No one, moved from the bottom 10 to the top 10 or vice versa. It didn't get anything crazy like that, so.
So a much steady state in
Yeah.
terms of risk.
Yeah, it's similar to what it's probably been in previous years, so.
So if the audit committee member wanted to better understand why the audit's included and what the scope of that audit is that what's in the last couple pages of the risk assessment? So if I wanted to, without you doing it today, by the way, because I don't have time for that, but if I want to understand why I don't know, the sanitary revenues and expenditures are included, where would I see that?
You mean why it's included on the audit plan?
Yes.
Well, ultimately, the audit plan is the director's decision, which is based on the risk assessment. They're really kind of the risk assessment's done independently. When we perform it, I don't say, well, whoever's in the top 10, that's automatically who's going to be audited. That's ultimate discretion of the director and then the audit committee to make that. When we have in the back, I just say, when sanitary, I think they came out maybe as the top one this year, I just say why they're scoring so high. And it's because of, the amount of revenue they take in, the size of the agency, whatever factors may be sort of driving that, which if they were to be all placed on the audit plan, we would probably be looking at some of those areas.
That is correct.
But it's not, we use it as a basis, for, coming up what's going to be sort of on the audit.
So to answer your question, you can look at this, and typically because of the methodology that was approved by the audit committee, that we look at all high inherent risk items annually, and then moderate, and then we try to do this 5-year cycle. What you will see is these do map back to the extent that we need to, and Jeremy has gone a little bit step further here to talk about, whether or not these particular areas have been audited recently and stuff. So if you look at Appendix C, it does give you a good guide where, like, for instance, he talks about the jail. He says, the jail is also going through a system change in X-Jail. The sheriff's office has recently made a concerted effort to hire. So he gives you some background on the risk that are inherited. But then if you look at, like, the medical examiner's office, it tells you about the risk, but it says audit focused on, then it says note, the medical examiner was reviewed by DIA in 2021. Audit focused on process. And so he's kind of giving you some insight into here as to why that may not be something that will ferret up onto the audit plan, because we just really looked at them. And we're going to be touching them because we are required to touch all highs on an annual basis. We'll be looking at them through their follow-up process for that audit. So the risk tracker, and you'll see when we talk about the audit plan, we have increased the number of hours for our audit tracker process because we have a lot of follow-up now that we need to do, because we've got a lot of audits that we have in action plans that need to be looked at and resolved to ensure that the findings are coming out, that they're doing what they said they were going to do to address those findings.
Okay. But if, to answer my, Appendix C would generally give.
Appendix C, yes, that
maybe a
is your
little bit of a
guide,
scope associated.
along with the description on the audit plan.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions regarding the risk assessment?
Chair, I just have a couple comments. and similar comments to discussion of, over the last couple years, I just don't think, priority 1 and 3 are necessary, particularly the ethics review, that falls under the Inspector General, an independent body. In 3, we're still going through a ton of litigation related to the jail. We have expert reports from both the plaintiffs and, joint expert reports from the plaintiffs and the defendants that have looked at the jail operations, and that's still going on. I just don't see the value in that taking place right now. I'm not saying it's something that doesn't need to happen down the road, but that litigation is still live. And then I am glad to see the hotel motel tax on there. I talked to Monica about that, item 11. I don't think that's been looked at in a while, so I think that there will be some value in that.
It
just
has
'cause-
never been looked at.
Okay. So those are just my comments on the three of the items.
Okay, so we're moving on to the audit plan now? Okay, thank you, Jeremy. So relative to the 2023 audit plan, the draft, it did come from the risk assessment, and as I mentioned, the items on here use the methodology that the cycle methodology in which we look at all high-risk areas annually. Now, where this differs at, and we're getting some efficiencies, is we don't have to do an audit every year of these high-risk areas. We have follow-up work that we're doing where we're touching them. So the requirement is that we look at and touch in some way these high-risk areas. So we will be doing that through our follow-up process. So a lot of if you look back at the risk assessment, a lot of high-risk areas are not on our audit plan, and that's because they're now embedded into our follow-up and tracking because we've already audited them within the last year and a half. So you're going to see some of those. And now it gives us an opportunity to move down in our cycle to our moderates. Before, we didn't have enough resources to cover our highs. Now, great improvement. We're now on to some moderate and even getting close to looking at some lows. And to Trevor's point, we're looking at areas we had not looked at before. So we are getting much greater coverage of the audit universe than we had previously. So this is definitely, improvement on our part in terms of moving the ball down the road in terms of our scope of services and what we look at. So to kind of address some of Trevor's issues, this ethics review, this was once again a recommendation from our peer review. Again, I'd like to try to kind of talk about the 3 lines of defense. When it comes to this, you have 3 lines of defense in an organization. You have the first level, which is normally management. They are the ones that are actually on the front line doing the transactions to mitigate the risk. Then you have your secondary line. Some organizations don't have a secondary. We do. That's people that are kind of performing what we call monitoring controls. That's what PRC does in some instances. In some instances, they are transactional. And same thing with the OIG's office. Some of the work that they do is front line, first line of defense. Some of the work that they do is second line defense, which is monitoring. When it comes to ethics, they have kind of a first line. They are transactional. They are actually performing the work relative to ethics. And then the PRC actually does some monitoring of them. But internal audit is always looked at as what we call the third line of defense. We are the ones that don't have any responsibility from transactional or compliance monitoring. We are the ones that are just providing independent objective assurance that these entities are performing what the responsibilities they have been assigned, whether it be at the transactional level or at the monitoring level. So if you understand kind of those, football terminology, first line of defense, second line of defense, third line of defense, we are third line of defense. And that's why that they are saying from a perspective of our standards that we need to look at the governance processes, and inherent in that is ethics. So even though the OIG does do the work, there's no one providing objective, independent assurance. The third line, that would be us. But the PRC does provide monitoring. So they do some work to ensure but not on everything. So even in the work that they do, it's not on all of the ethics work. So there's some things there too. So just to give everybody a full, clear thing. But definitely, this is something, I think this is why the presentation was requested from the OIG. And until you have that, we have kind of, we carried this forward from last year, but it's carried forward in the same respect as a contingency audit. Until you guys tell us it's something that you want us to do, we will not actually be performing this work. And I think you are waiting on a decision based upon what the OIG presents to you and tells you that they do. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman?
I don't think so. I think we were just looking for kind of an elaboration of what their whole office does, including what they do with ethics.
Okay, yeah, they're going to come to you with that, but if my memory was, I think that's the original reason you requested, because there were some members that didn't understand the role that they played in ethics. But you know, whatever you guys say, my responsibility is to present to you a risk-based audit plan, and so I'm just fulfilling that responsibility. Also on here, in terms of jail operations, when you look at the hours that are, and you add them up, I will tell you that we have more hours on here than we have work available, and that is because we are considering the ethics review and the jail operations to be ones that probably will not occur. So when you see this final plan put before you, where we balance out our hours, these are probably going to be recommended ones in which we place, recommend a whole base. We just kind of know what our audit committee members' concerns are. So in anticipation of that, the full audit hours here is like over 7,000, and 6,000 is about what we have available. So Mr. Chairman had asked when I met with him to make sure that we had appropriately allocated our staff, and this is an over allocation, but we do understand that there will be items based upon this committee's decisions that we will not complete.
When is our next, I guess I'll call it bite at the apple, in terms of considering a enhancement to our budget so that we could actually provide the number of hours that your process flushes out?
So you have the, every year you can go before and ask for the money,
Right,
but
but-
the budget, the two-year budget cycle,
When in the,
the two-year budget cycle, we're coming up on it, right, Mike? The budget cycle? Right. So
at what meeting of this committee would we have to consider the budget in order to
June.
comply?
It's going to be the second quarter meeting.
Okay.
But that would be for the 24 budget, not the 23 audit plan.
Right. Yeah, so that's going to be for the 24-25 because it's a two-year cycle.
Understood. Thank you.
So before we get into the other items on the agenda, and maybe this will help a little bit. So you have one member of the audit committee who thinks we should at least be deferring these two audits. Does anybody, other members of the audit committee, anybody on the audit committee want to insist that those two audits are contained in the 23 audit?
Clarify ethics and what other ones?
Can you speak in the mic?
Jail.
Priority 3. So.
I'm interested to hear what the OIG has to say about the ethics. The jail, I don't see any reason to hold off.
To not do it?
Right.
Mr. Chairman, my office shares the concerns that Trevor mentioned. These reports are used in litigation against us and creating issues for folks to bring claims puts us at greater risk, I think. And the jail is in continuous improvement, and I think deferring until a later year would benefit the county, where we get into a more steady state.
Mr. Chair, if I could add to, just to give a little bit more context, I think in terms of what what Mark's coworkers in the civil division are concerned about. In the last, I want to say 4 to 5 years, we've had a U.S. Marshals review. We've had an Inspector General review. We've had the state of Ohio change from change from annual to monthly reviews of the jail. They just recently, I think in the last year, went back to annually. And then we also had, I believe it is called the National Association of Corrections, I believe, come in and do a review of the operations. And currently, and this is not, the report itself I don't believe is public, but there is a joint expert between those that are suing the county for the jail conditions. There's a joint expert report that also has looked at this. And I think that's close to being resolved, but that's why I don't think we need a 6th or 7th look at it right now.
If I may, in talking with Trevor and understanding what is going on with the litigation, if they are coming out with the agreement and the things that they're going to do, our resources would probably be better utilized to ensure, once that agreement is in place, that we're complying. So, although it is high risk, and we need to look at it, if they're going through this process, I think it would probably be the best use of resources and limiting the risk to do it later. Give it another year or so for us to be able to come in and do some work on it. Yes, it is high risk. Yes, someone should be looking at it, but there are these circumstances that present, I think, an even greater risk to the organization than just us not looking at what's happening, because it's already happened, right? And so they have to deal with the fallout from it. But our goal, hopefully, is in the future to prevent it from happening, well, to at least identify areas, if they exist, that management would be aware of to try to prevent this from happening. And again, and to that extent, the agreement that you're working on would be most useful.
If I could follow up to that too, I think there's going to be agreed upon changes from the federal lawsuit. And I think in the next year and a half, maybe 2, whenever it's settled, things get implemented, I think there's going to be plenty of work that can be reviewed to make sure these changes are being made. I just don't see the value right now of setting aside 350 hours to go look at it right now with everything else going on.
Is it, if we were to get a consensus that, to follow that line of thinking, Monica, could your department prepare a memo that bridges from the risk assessment, which would indicate that we would be doing the audit, to the decision to defer, so that this just doesn't...
Understood, to protect
we
the
can't
audit
be looked
committee.
at as we just dropped it, we were
Understood.
blind, but that there was rationale to follow. I'm sure
Most certainly
much
can.
along the lines of the discussion that's taken place, but
Absolutely.
running it by legal counsel
Yes.
before we sign off on it.
Certainly could do that, yes.
Monica, you're comfortable with deferring those 2?
I'm comfortable with deferring the sheriff's office, just based upon my understanding and knowledge. Alexa is doing a great job with ethics, but I just, sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and we work together very well, but I would like the opportunity to go in and look at that from a holistic perspective, because like I said, the PRC only looks at a piece of it, a very small piece from a monitoring perspective, but she's on the front line, and I think she would appreciate some additional insight, particularly I do have quite a bit of experience in that area.
So are you suggesting?
I'm suggesting that we do the ethics one, but again, if you want to hear from the OIG, prior to making that decision, certainly understand.
So, Mr. Chairman, are you looking for a motion to approve the audit plan without those two, if we want to defer those at this point?
Well, you have to reduce 1,000 hours anyway, right?
Pretty much. I mean, I think when it comes to risk, that is a higher risk item. So I would, if you guys would like to do that one, then we would, when I come back to you, I'd look at everything on this plan and make a recommendation, whereas maybe like animal shelter, because it's lower on the risk spectrum, might drop off.
So, I mean, there's, I don't know, 14 audits, or there's 14 areas here on the audit plan. Do we want to have Monica go through these 14 items and just a couple of sentences as to why they're on here, or are they pretty self-explanatory, or can we figure it out by reading the appendix, or how do you guys want to go about doing this? Because
So let me also say this, you really don't need a formal approval right now. We have more than enough work to carry us through to the next meeting. Well, maybe not quite. Yeah, maybe. We're doing really, I'm so proud of my team. We are getting through our audits, you know, trying to do it, right? So, you know, I think the next item that would be up would be, if they're ready, would be bank reconciliation, but they're probably not going to be ready until maybe mid-June. Okay, so then it would probably be looking at grants management and funding and development loan portfolio management is what we'd be doing.
Monica, what happens to if the committee agreed to take 1 and 3 off, what happens to
Oh,
2
I'm
then?
sorry, we did skip over
Okay,
sanitary.
I just wanted to, if there was rationale
Thank you,
there.
no,
Okay.
yeah, no, it was sanitary would be next. Yeah, that would be the next up, that we would, you know, continue on between now and the next one. We would, you know, so this is just really, you know, if you're good with sanitary, if you're good with grants, then we have enough work to get through to the next.
All right. So I guess for purposes of making a decision, because I think we have to make a decision to move forward. So,
Right.
so you have to come back to the audit committee with a plan that we have to approve formally
Correct.
at the next meeting.
Correct.
So if you had to reduce 1,000 hours out of, because you have to reduce 1,000 hours out of this, right?
Probably so, yes.
So I think what I'm hearing here, just because we have to balance the audit plan anyway, would be to just, at least for this year, remove the ethics, remove the jail, and what would be the third one to remove to balance the audit plan? Sanitary?
Well, I'll make that, let me look at it. I haven't looked at that because this is just kind of, this is what we're recommending, give you an opportunity to give me feedback, and then we do the full-fledged one. So I just need a tentative approval that we can move forward with these items, you know, like sanitary grants, if we run out of work. That's basically what this is all about is, you know, if we want to consider moving, I think in the past, it's worked the first quarter of the year to get that plan approved, but, you know, with us, you know, kind of getting through our work a little bit quicker, our cycle time is much shorter than it had been. Maybe we can move the formal approval next year to December, and I can have that full thing ready for you where we do all of the analysis and give you better, but given the protocol of what we've been, it's just tentatively, do we have the okay to move forward with, if we need to, sanitary revenues and grants management or development loan portfolio? I always like to have more than enough. Or, you know, kind of really anything but, you know, we won't look at ethics, ethics, jail, or is there anything else that you don't want us to do before next?
Why don't we just
Committee.
formally approve it without the ethics and jail and come back? Otherwise, we're only tentatively doing it. We'll have to revisit it again, right? Can't we always amend it later, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, so pretty much that first quarter meeting is where you really, because it shows you, the committee, everything in terms of hours and resources and matched and stuff. So that work isn't done here for you.
I get it.
But if you say, I mean, it's just a really informal approval to say, yes, you can continue working if you need to on these items. And what I'm hearing from the committee is we can do that for everything but ethics and jail. Would that be accurate?
I think that's accurate. Yes, that's accurate.
Okay.
Monica, do you think the likelihood you'll get to hotel motel tax? I mean, I understand.
If it's on our audit plan, yeah.
Okay.
I know they're going through an implementation, but it's a good area, so it'd be nice to have it looked at. But they do bring in a lot, and they do a great job auditing the hotels, so it'd be great.
I agree, and I mean, I would almost like to see that bumped up. I mean, I understand the priority, but there's just a lot of cash that goes through there, and I don't think it's ever been looked at, and I just think that's gonna be a good audit and necessary.
Yeah, so in terms of that, if it's on the audit plan, our goal is to get to it that year. So if it's there, we're gonna get to it. We try to work out the timing with, we socialize the audit plan. We try to work out the timing of the audit scheduling with the people. But we try to get to everything, and we pretty much do. There might be some, like this year, facilities was scheduled to be completed in the next year, but we try to get through everything within a year. We try.
Okay, so I'm gonna bring this to closure. So how do we bring this to closure? Do we have to approve anything formally?
No, you don't really. Just having you know that we will keep working on this, and then formally you can do it.
Okay,
Okay,
everybody good with that? Okay,
all right, but we do need to approve the risk assessment.
okay.
We need a formal
Motion
approval of the risk.
we need a motion to approve the risk assessment for 2023.
So moved.
Okay, all in favor of approving the risk assessment, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, perfect. All righty. So we're gonna go back to 7A, the management update on the 2021 financial audit. So thankfully,
Lee?
the number of findings were significantly reduced from prior years. So this presentation, I'm not sure, it actually moved it up a meeting because of the timing of the financial statement audit completion, so. All right.
Yeah, I want to push back.
Do you want me to go? I'll just go over high.
Lee, turn your mic on.
I'm just going to go over a high level of what the finding was and how we remedied the finding.
And we went through the responses
Oh,
for
okay.
for the findings in the report that
Okay.
when the auditors presented it, right?
Yes.
Because the responses were there, so,
Yes.
so this is just a management level.
Okay, good. Okay,
Right,
great.
well, I want to make, for our committee members, are we okay with that?
Yes.
So with the post-audit, they went through the findings in the report with the management's responses, so
Correct.
we already heard that. Now we're just talking about the management letter.
Okay, so the first management letter that was in there was, we had a finding that in the the finding was that basically we're overexpending our dollars. Oh, there it is, I'm sorry, I probably can't even see it. There was a budgetary compliance finding where basically our certificates of our estimated resources, we had overspent our budget on those items. So one of the things that we did this year, well, we started kind of mid-year last year as well, was OBM started to do quarterly reviews so that they would update their certificates throughout the year. So we ran into a problem because we
Lee,
weren't.
can I give you a pause 1 moment? Audit committee members, this is the chart, but then there's a separate packet like that looks like this, that's paper clipped in your thing that has management's responses. This is so I see a lot of you kind of fill in.
Okay.
You're welcome. So the last page has the fiscal office responses.
Right.
Go ahead, Lee.
Okay, so to back up again, so we, the management issue was brought up because our expenditures had exceeded our estimated resources from our original certificate. So what we decided to do, work with OBM so that they could do quarterly reviews to make sure that even though our estimated resources, that they would be updated. And that not only did our expenditures stay within our budget, but that we were updating our estimated resources as well, because that's the part that was missing. So if appropriations were coming in lower than what we had on our certificates, we weren't making adjustments, so we were running into issues with findings based on that. So although our expenditures may have been within our budget, they weren't within what we were estimating on our certificate. So the certificate is almost like the book of record, and that's our formal budget, even though county may approve something else. So,
Lee, can I interrupt for just a moment? So the official certificate, the amended certificates, for local government, we file with the county. Who does the county file with?
we file it once a year with the state.
Well, we also filed with Brian Dunn and the Budget
Correct, the
Commission,
Budget
just like
Commission.
everybody else. So we basically didn't tell ourselves to update it.
Right,
I mean, we got better on that.
yeah.
And we had a little frustration because we were expecting our Budget Commission to come over to our director and say, hey, you haven't done it. They're only like 30 feet away. So we've worked that out where Lee's now saying we're doing it quarterly or
Correct.
monthly or whatever.
And we're
getting it.
updating our certificates as well.
Didn't tell on ourselves.
Correct. So we were only doing it once a year, which was at the beginning of the year, but now we're updating our certificates as quarterly so that it reflects our appropriate amount of revenue that we're expecting to get in, so that we're not overspending our estimated revenue. Okay.
It should disappear forever. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. The next one is written policies required by the Uniform Guidance for Federal Programs. This is basically HHS. And what HHS, their current policy that they're using is the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services policy and procedure, but there are some procedures within the federal guidelines that are slightly different, and this has been on there a couple times. And HHS, with their limited resources, they have asked fiscal to assist them developing developing a policy that would be in conformance with the federal guidelines, and we're assisting them currently with that. We haven't completed that, so hopefully by the time the audit rolls around, though, that we will have something in place. We had hoped to have it in place, a new policy in place by the end of this year, but it's looking like it's going to be more of first quarter of 2022. But in theory, this is HHS's responsibility, and they do know that, and they're working on it. They just asked us for some assistance with that. Is there any questions regarding this issue number
So this will probably be a repeat.
Correct, because it will not be, it wouldn't have been implemented for
For
2022.
22.
Correct. So hopefully we can get it resolved. It's just a matter of resources. I mean, they're down about as well. Item number 3, fraud reporting. So this item was related to onboarding where there were some missing documents or signatures for new hires. They hadn't signed a document confirming that they had been made aware of the state's fraud reporting process. There was a disconnect. In theory, prior to COVID, there was a new hire package that included documentation that said, this is the web address. Please acknowledge that you have seen it and you reviewed it. During COVID, when we kind of moved to an electronic process, when there was remote work, it was a gap in the process. Since that time, part of the new hire package has included documentation. It's still electronic, but HR now has documentation to say that is a sign-off that's part of the package that says, yes, I have reviewed it, I have gone to the link, and they acknowledge that they have it. Now, there still may be a slight disconnect because HR can only control like the executive agencies, so they can't enforce that process to the non-executive agencies and the boards. So we have reached out to all non-executive agencies and boards, to their HR staff, to make sure that when they have new hires, that they direct their new hires to the Auditor of State's website to talk about the fraud reporting system. So they have acknowledged that, yes, they will be doing that going forward, but in theory, all the findings were related to the executive agency. So it was really important for our HR department to make sure that they were doing it. But I just reiterated it with all the non-executive agencies as well, even though they didn't have any issues. So hopefully going forward, that will be alleviated. I don't think there will be any issues for 2022, just because Pat went in, Patrick Smott, the Director of HR, he did go in and kind of go through new hires, and he confirmed that if there was documentation missing for anybody hired in 2022, that he went back to those people to say, hey, please sign this document acknowledging that you've been made aware of this. So hopefully there's no gaps and he didn't miss anybody, but that was the plan for 2022.
So out of curiosity, if a county employee reports something to the state auditor's office, who would the state auditor's office notify here at the county of that?
Most likely the Inspector General. If there were fraud issues or somebody brought up something through the process, yes, correct. Most likely the Inspector General.
I mean, is that documented somewhere? I mean, is it, I don't know how.
I would have to, I believe it is because the Inspector General completes some paperwork confirming something to do with the fraud reporting system and how do they report it. And the Inspector General then in turn submits this documentation back to the external auditor stating what their process is. And at that point, if the Inspector General can escalate it to the prosecutor's office as well, if it's something that's like criminal in nature.
We can save this for our conversation with her when she comes in.
Yeah. Yep. Items 4, I believe, through 7, those items that the IT team was going to cover, and they have not gotten back to me, but they were going to do their own presentation, but I believe Jeremy is out. So I will take responsibility for making sure I get you the next 4 items that are related to IT. I'll try to get you that.
So Lee, we did hear back from Jeremy early this morning.
Okay.
He's unable to make the meeting.
Okay.
But he did send in his responses. Now,
Okay.
if you'd like me to read them to you, or if you'd like us to just send them to you as a follow-up item, what would you prefer?
Just send them? Yeah, just send them and then
Okay.
we'll just decide, or just in our preparation, whether or not we want to have them come and present next meeting.
Okay, will do.
Okay. Now, are there any questions regarding the management letter comments or something that you would like me to follow up on? All right. And just an FYI, we have a meeting with the Clark Schaefer, our external auditors, next week to begin the planning for 2022's audit. And just also as an FYI, because I know this is hot and heavy on Monica's mind, GASB 87, I think we're in pretty good shape. We have a template developed. We've sent out the information to all of the agencies, and we've gotten responses back. So the LGS, who are the people that help us compile our financial statements, they have begun reviewing our contracts already. So I think we're in pretty good shape for that.
On that topic, though, we are at the mercy of the agencies, so.
Correct.
I mean, they have to fill that out. If they miss something and the auditors find it, well then, we'll do our best.
We'll be in a little bit
Yeah.
of trouble, but at this point, every agency has responded and turned in something. So hopefully hopefully we got a little jump start on that.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think you've noticed the improvement over the last couple of years in the audit, so most of that has to do with Lee and Lennon and her team, so I'd like to
Absolutely.
thank her publicly. Thank you, Lee.
Absolutely, I would agree.
Thank you. All right, we're trying to get there, so.
And Lee, just know that we have started our lease revenue audit, and so we will be contacting you. One of the part of the discussion will be GASB 87.
Okay, gotcha.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Oh, she already accepted? Ah, good, great. Okay.
And just, I don't want to go over it, but the purpose of the document in your file here, if you want to go look at it, just, you get some statistical information about how many findings were resolved and how many are carried over. So it does reflect the great job that you guys are doing in resolving these issues. But the statistics are actually on here if you want to take a look at it. Thank you. All right. So next item is the semi-annual audit issue update. So I'll turn that over to Josh.
And Catherine. Catherine, you'll just chime in if you need to. But, so let me just a prelude to this is the process that was established about 2 years ago now for follow-up, and it's been working really, really well. Thank you, Catherine, so much for the support that you and your team add to this. It's a great collaborative relationship, and I think that it's definitely something that benefits us and gives us efficiencies in our process. And it was also something that was noted by our peer review as a great item. A noteworthy item.
All right. So as Monica mentioned, this is the issue tracker report. Basically, it's our way of following up on recommendations of audit reports. Now, if you'll look at the first 7 pages, it's all basically stats and charts and whatnot. Pages 8 through 51 are the details involved. So if you have any questions on anything specific, the details are there. But to go through the summary, page 1 is the recommendation summary by audit. It basically gives a high-level look of the audits that internal audit has released since 2017 through, well, when we created this report, it was November 15th. It's actually changed a little bit since then. However, shows the number of recommendations, the risk assessed, as well as how many are currently remaining open. So grand total, it's actually the first 2 pages, there was 819 recommendations as of November 15th. There are 133 that still remain open.
So are there any of the audits that are not new audits that you don't see a lot of progress being made on as far as resolving the recommendations?
As in older audits, I mean, I guess it kind of depends on what your criteria of old versus new is. Now, one that we have tested a few times is IT inventory. They do have some highs involved. I see Catherine getting up to kind of address.
On some of the ones, because I believe if you look through them, they're listed in order of age, right, as we go through those. And I would say the ones that are open mainly on the IT contracts, that's part of the need of the ERP testing. A lot of that is, so those, while they're open, they haven't been tested because pretty much everything moved into the new ERP process.
Right, the resolution or action plan had to do with implementation of the ERP system, and we have yet to test the ERP system.
The Invest in Children ones that have 2 open, I believe some of that, they were also needing to put things into new contracts. I think one of those was, those new contracts, I believe, start in January of this year, or of the coming year, so hopefully we'll be having addressed those. I know the IT inventory one, that one, we had a meeting actually to talk through that. So they put in a number of policies, and I believe IT management was led to believe that those policies were in place, but they weren't being followed. The person that was over that area is no longer a county employee, and so they are working to address, and there's somebody in this room that is working on that. And, we actually just recently in Innovation also completed a process improvement project on their asset disposal to help them to manage those and make sure that those things are corrected in their inventory as well. So I think it's after Q1, there's some commitment there that those should be done from IT's perspective. And then I think the medical examiners and on down, a lot of those, I'm not sure what the open ones on the medical examiners, but then the other ones are fairly newer ones that still have items that are remaining open.
Yeah, I mean, even the medical examiners, I believe that was released just last year. So,
Yeah.
I mean, they're all still, besides those 3, all fairly new audits and not unexpected to still see open items.
Thank you. That was the question I was asking. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine.
Yep.
All right, so if we move on to page 3, it basically gives kind of a summary level of the second half of 2022 activity that we have performed thus far. So we did add 2 reports, which was the DSAS, or Senior and Adult Services, as well as the employee leave. However, since then, there was another one released, which is real property. So that's not included on here at the moment. Testing completed. By conclusion, if you look, we tested during the second half of the year 42 recommendations. Of those, 19 were fully resolved, 15 were partially resolved, 3 were not resolved, 4 were actually withdrawn, which I can provide the detail on those if need be, and 1 was risk accepted.
Can you talk about risk accepted?
Yes. If you look on, actually at the top of the next page, there's kind of a brief explanation of each category. So basically, management has accepted the risk of not taking any corrective actions. Are you looking for the specific item or?
So I think it's important to note with this committee is that, our job is to inform management of areas of risk where they are not maybe appropriately mitigating them, and to get them to try to put something into place. But management does have the option to accept risk, and we will just report it through this process to you. If that's what you may deem to be an appropriate acceptance of risk, then there would need to be further discussion. This particular item, was it low?
To be honest,
Yeah.
I do not recall.
Okay, Catherine.
Catherine's got it up.
Okay, so this was actually about tracking software and licenses, and it's not, I think it's from IT inventory. So it was a low item, and I do believe they have other systems where they track networks, and I'm gonna get way out over my knowledge if I try and get too much into that detail. They do have other systems that protect our network and things. I think they're still going to be working on a way to have a full tracking of it, but at this point, I believe it would be a very expensive solution for the level of risk that it was. So that's why they accepted the risk on that. We do try and use that very limitedly. And even when I have conversations with directors and things saying, okay, there are potential on some cases, but we try and use that on a very sparing basis, obviously, where we're accepting risk.
And just know something like that, that's a low item, we wouldn't suggest the committee spend any time on. What would happen in that regard is when we go through our audit cycle, we're going to come back around to that, and we're going to look at all the exception items, whether they're high, medium, or low, in our new audit, and see what's going on with that, and you would get a report then if that was still an issue or concern.
What will be comforting for me on that, since you're management and the other folks are management, like it'd be helpful for me to know that you would be okay with the department accepting the risk.
So we go over, whenever they give me a risk accepted one, I am reviewing it. Now, again, in this case, I don't have necessarily the expertise to tell you if that's an acceptable risk. Knowing it's a low one, I'm probably not going to fight them very hard on something like that. If it was a high or something medium, then we would have a conversation about and understand and tell them what they're saying by saying the risk, and what would we do, to review that and make sure it's a good level of risk.
And
so I can
Andy,
help, but I don't always have the expertise on what's going on to know if that's an appropriate risk.
But Andy also has hands-on oversight in this as well, so it's not like he's not involved. He is very aware of these items.
Yeah, it's the director of the department would be the one that, so again, if somebody on the team told me they were accepting it, those I always kind of run up through the director to make sure that they know that they're saying they're accepting risk as well.
So what would happen if it was a high-risk item and you and the director disagreed on the acceptance of the risk?
Well, normally we have had some where they're just like, well, we accept the risk. And I was like, no, that's not a good idea. So we've had those conversations, and so far we've been able to come to what's the appropriate addressing of it. If not, again, that could be something that we would raise to a higher level. So far, I generally work with them and say, okay, well, what can we fix? And talk about that, or what is the best way to do it. Or have them share what the real reason is. Sometimes it's like, well, yes, to do that. I think we had some with Public Works previously, and they're like, the cost of putting in a whole new parking system or something like that would be way beyond anything that would actually recover the funds or that were at risk or something. There was something in there.
Yeah.
So, I think it was missed parking past that juvenile court or something. So that was one where, again, they had the point where it was like, yes, people may not pay for parking there, but the cost of a parking system would be well beyond what we would get from that parking revenue. So those cases, if they have a good rationale for it, we can work with Audit. And we also work with Audit to share that as well.
And that process is great. I appreciate you spending your time doing that.
And we appreciate it greatly.
Absolutely.
It really does help us. So I am looking forward to continuing this.
Yeah, and we do a good job working with Dawn. I actually, during this meeting, have been sending out a couple of things that she's sent out on things that she's working on as well, so.
Yeah. So I'm just hoping that the new administration we'll be able to continue this. This executive liaison, I believe, was a result of Executive Budish appointing you as such. So this is definitely an item that the audit committee, I would recommend when we talk with the new executive, that we really get him to agree this is going to continue, because it's something that I think benefits the overall county.
All right. And again, just to make everybody aware, at year end, there will be memos going out, similar to last year, where it just goes to the executive, and that kind of documents the recommendations that we tested that resulted in partially or not resolved or risk accepted. It documents it out to the agency level so that they're aware of what their departments are accepting.
Each director gets their department's open recommendations then?
It would just be like executive level. So, like Armin got one last year.
Or HHS. You didn't send it to the head of HHS, I think we did. I believe so. Oh, just the executive? Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, executive.
Well, if you're recommending, if you'd like us to get it down to that director level.
Department level.
Yeah, I think for the, just pick IT, not picking on IT, but I think the memo should go to Andy Johnson as well, and the sheriff's one should go to the sheriff, right? I think, right, because it might not always get filtered down, particularly with the upcoming transition.
Okay.
But I think sending it down to, CC each director.
Okay.
So that way they
departmental
know,
level.
the executive is being informed, and they it might not be on their radar as much as Catherine's working with the departments, but especially with potentially
Definitely noted.
turnover.
We can do that.
So are you thinking individual communications, or are we thinking CC?
I would CC the directors that have
Directors.
open items.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That we can absolutely
Yeah.
do.
I think just CC the ones that are appropriate.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Trevor.
It's a good report.
All right, so to continue on, excuse me, pages 4 and 5, just kind of gives the status of the remaining 133 that are still open. The 133 starts on page 5.
And what you will see is that we bumped up our hours on the audit plan for us to address these open items. As you can see, it's quite a bit.
Yes.
So we'll be looking, that it will be a lot of work that we do next year to go through and do the testing as appropriate and ensure that these items are moving through the process as they should be.
Correct. So of the remaining 133 that are there, 17 require some IT consulting to assess, which is part of what Catherine was mentioning about the older open items. There are also 109 that are pending detailed testing. Now those are we schedule those out based on the risk level that's assigned at the time. So hires get looked at sooner, moderates get looked at kind of in the midway point, and lows are less of a priority. Now, if Catherine comes back and reports that a department has said that something that we weren't planning on looking at is fully resolved, that's not gonna stop us from looking at it, obviously. We will try and test and resolve as needed. and then there are also 7 that we are currently haven't quite finished up that we had planned for 2022, but they should be wrapped up by year end. Again, the 7 through 51 are the details on individual recommendations. If anybody has any questions.
Okay, good. Okay, thanks, Josh. A lot of work and statistics and a great way of handling the updates to the audit committee. So item F, the resident member annual independence statement. So I think this is just a reminder to the audit committee that soon Monica will be sending out the independence forms for us to complete. And just, again, it's a process we established a few years ago to have audit committee members reporting entities that we're actually involved with, just to make sure that there's no conflict of interest. And I think last year we changed the process. They go back to the Inspector General.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. When do you think you'll be sending those out?
In January.
January.
You recall, at least I find it very helpful
I
to
will
have
do
a copy
exactly
of
that.
last year's report.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, so to the extent that I have a copy, because not everybody sends me theirs, but if I do get a copy, because it goes to the Inspector General now, if you send me yours and I forward yours.
Oh.
But if I have a copy, I will send you what I have. If I don't, then I'll just send you the form.
Okay, so next item, the upcoming audit committee member reappointment. So this is kind of a standing item. So, so again, as we've talked about before, Keith's term is up this year. If you don't mind me speaking for you, Happy New Year. Keith has agreed to be considered for reappointment for another term. I'm assuming his reappointment process is kind of hung up right now through the transition of a new county executive, as well as individuals who used to perform that function. So hopefully you will be reappointed. I think you're very well qualified and all that kind of good stuff to brown nose you a little bit, but thanks again.
Said yes.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you know,
Right?
I take it all back then. All right.
Yeah. And hopefully, because, anything that he would need to be voted on would be at a meeting. So the next meeting would be in March. So hopefully by March, he will have gone through hopefully been reappointed by that time. But if not, then we'll have to look at what options we have, which Mark is looking into. Okay. Then I think you'll have another announcement relative to that.
So we, hopefully you guys all saw the email where Yvette has submitted her resignation from the audit committee. So she had talked to me a few times over the years about all of the things that she's actually trying to juggle right now. So due to all of that, she thought that it was the right time to resign. So again, I just want to publicly thank Yvette for the years that she's actually served on the committee and get that reflected in the minutes. I guess I'll leave it up to you to.
And that was effective Friday.
Yeah, it was when she sent the email,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yes.
What, Mr. Chair, Monica, do you know when her term is up?
She was just reappointed last year, so it would be in 25. Yeah, 25.
And again, I just would like to have this reflected in the minutes that I did want to thank the outgoing county executive for his participation and input into this committee. He's a very busy individual, but he allocated time to attend all of our meetings and I thought provided great insight. So I did want to unfortunately he's not here to thank him at the meeting, but have it maybe reflected in the minutes. And hopefully with the new county executive, will actually be as actively engaged in the audit committee moving forward. So
I think he will. I actually had the privilege of meeting him night before last. Was here working late, stopped to put my book bag on downstairs, and he came up behind me and said, "You look like somebody I'll be working with," and we had a great conversation. And I said, "Yes, we will be. You will be on the audit committee," and we would. And so he was just a terrific guy. So really looking forward to hearing his input and getting his input. Lots of energy.
Yeah.
Lots of energy.
So hopefully you can get on his calendar pretty early.
Trying to
and-
work with Laura on the transition team, so yeah, trying to get some, yeah, absolutely.
So, obviously when you meet, and make sure he understands the appointments that need to be addressed, and make sure he understands what we're all about, so. the charter and
Absolutely
all
will do,
that. Okay.
yeah.
So any other comments on the reappointments of individuals? Okay. So next item is the quality assessment updates. So this is, again, the responses to the peer review, I think is primarily in this. So I responded on behalf of the audit committee in regards to some of the comments and recommendations that dealt with the work that we're doing. I think the county executive addressed them from his perspective, and then Monica's team also provided a number of responses. So I don't know if we want to go through, I mean, I think you've
Yeah,
shared these.
for the sake of time, I won't go through them all, but what I will say is from our perspective, we have done, there's nothing that we've not, that we committed to that we did not do. So if you look at it, there is DIA management responses and, what we said we would do, because this is several pages here, but pretty much we did not deter from what we had established. Did anyone have any questions about the DIA management responses? Okay. I did talk with Executive Budish, and he maintained that his responses would be static and stay the same. So we'll just need to, circle those back with the new administration.
Okay, everybody good with that one? All right, so,
One other thing. So the next, there's a second part to that, was as part of our response, one of the things that the peer assessment recommended is that we formally present to you our internal assessment report. And so we have given that to you. And basically, this is where we go through and we do, we're supposed to do an internal assessment. The external assessment is what they do every 3 to 5 years, depending upon what you say. Standards say 5, but our audit committee would like us to do it in 3, so we do it every 3 years. But every year, we should be assessing ourselves. So that's the internal assessment. And so that's what you see in this here, where we talk about generally conforms, partially conforms, do not conforms. And so I just want to bring up that, in accordance with professional standards, we still have we now have, I won't say still have, we now have a partially conforms as it results to our inability to compel the audit and do the work for PRC. And that's what's driving that PC. But in most areas, as you can see, we have a generally conforms. Any questions on that? Something else that we did as part of this assessment that we do surveys. So surveys were something we always did in the past, but they basically went into a hole. They didn't realize who was even getting the surveys back from people. But we've made a concerted effort to make that process a little bit more robust, to make sure that we are, to the extent we can, following up, trying to get surveys back, and to the extent that we can, quantifying the information and utilizing that information to improve our process. So it's feedback for us. We have presented to you the surveys that we have done from October 2021 through October 2022. We have the number of audits with surveys in reporting period was 4. Survey questionnaires sent was a total of 16. We received number 7, which is about a 46, excuse me, I can't see that. Is that 44? 44% response rate. Overall, there was a strongly agrees or an agrees. We do have one area where there was someone that indicated that some of the recommendations they didn't believe were as constructive as they would have liked them to be. And we continue to work on our process as it relates to that. Also inherent in that, you will see on that last page is free-form responses. Some of the things that they have said in the free-form responses is that I am satisfied with the process. I think it went very well. I would probably include program managers in the discussion of findings and the debriefs for future audits. I think you were good. And then on the other side, in your report, we were instructed to participate. So they give a little bit of detail about how one of our recommendations was kind of a circular thing for them. So we will keep that in point where they say basically what we recommended they had been doing, and they thought they could get rid of personnel by not doing it. And now, based upon what we're saying is something they need to be doing, they now have to do it, but less the personnel. So, but then there's the all surveys responses aggregate, and as you can see, pretty much it's an agree or strongly agrees. Very little neutrals and very small amount of a disagree. So I think the department's doing well in the feedback that we are receiving. We are trying to get more feedback, but people, unfortunately, when you ask for surveys, they can be surveyed out a lot of times and don't give the appropriate feedback, but we're working to try to get that feedback because we want to do better. If we can do better, just like we ask others to do better. Any questions?
All righty, thank you.
Okay.
So item I, so I did want to make a couple of comments on some of these items before Monica goes through these, but and maybe we can go through the first bullet point, and then you can come back to me, and I give my comments on the second bullet point if you want to do it that way.
Okay.
So let's start with an employee leave payroll review audit report. We don't normally discuss audit reports at this meeting. I think we all have the opportunity to read it, and if we have any questions, we have the opportunity to ask those questions. But as I was reading that particular audit, it raised some concerns for me that I want to make sure that, they just get talked about today, and Monica's going to do it. But a couple of the items that I have that raise concern for me on that one is this whole executive and non-executive issue that we continue to deal with here at the county. And I get it, and I get the challenges, but when we talk about payroll and payroll processes, I think it's pretty clear that there's different processes associated with the different classifications of the various divisions, and Mike's not here right now, but if there's an issue with payroll, I don't think the Auditor State's Office cares about if it's an executive or a non-executive agency. They're going to come back to the Chief Fiscal Officer or the centralized HR person and include them in that. But I just want to have Monica explain a little bit more to the audit committee members to make sure you guys understand how payroll gets processed. I'm assuming kind of differently for the two entities, and whether or not there's the same level of scrutiny and review that's getting done if you're an executive agency and a non-executive agency. In each one of the scope areas within that particular audit, so each one of the various areas that the internal audit team looked at, there were actually overpayments identified in each one of those individual areas, which again then, leads to the concern because they only did sampling in regards to that, and they only looked at 1 year. So they looked at, I think, 2020. You still have this whole year of 2021, and I believe things actually may have changed in 2022 through the implementation of the ERP system. But the question that kind of lays out for me is, what should management be doing with both 2021 in regards to these areas, as well as the sampling versus the 100% the 100% complete review. And again, we're talking about overpayments, which potentially can lead to finding for recovery, which, as we know from the audit committee, have always been very sensitive issues here. I think the next thing for consideration is right now they're just findings, or they're not findings, they're recommendations in an internal audit report. Who's going to be, what's the process, or what's the county considering as far as even collecting on those identified overpayments, to maybe make sure that they don't turn into filing for recoveries if they get to that level. So for me, this was a little bit different, I think, than some of the other audits that have been done. And I just want to make sure the audit committee members are aware of that. And I don't know, Monica, if you want to, I probably took you, I don't think you're going to talk about, but.
Sure, no, but you gave a great outline, and I'll do my best to move through this very quickly with that outline. So, executive, non-executive. When we looked at the scope of this, we did have to give consideration. Lee mentioned this earlier when she was talking about payroll and non-executives. They have their own HR. When she was going through the issue with the that the auditor of state had relative to information provided this for the fraud, right? Some non-executive agencies, they have their own HR departments. To the extent that they have their own HR departments, they have those records and they process their own payroll. And what actually happens and comes over to Lee is just, hey, this is the amount, this is how much we need you to pay this person, pay them. And that's the authority that they have to pay them. The actual data behind that, whether it's correct timesheets, all of that, that's all at that agency and not looked at or validated at all by anyone in the county. And so to that extent, when we were looking at this, so how this audit took place is we were just basically looking, because the auditor of state had the finding as it was relative to an overpayment of an employee, which, the public record shows was Paul Waller. And because of that, the question that I asked was, are there any other payments out there that we should be aware of? Because the auditor of state did not expand their testing. They just stuck with just that. So this audit was the scope, going back to your second point of the 2020. We looked at 2020 alone because that was where the auditor of state found the issue with Paul Waller, and we looked to see what other issues were prevalent that may actually impact other years to the extent that we could, but we also looked to see through testing, of course, not 100% did we test 100%, but the population was 100%, to see if we could identify any other overpayments, which we did. So that's your third point. But going back to executive, non-executive, in the areas of detailed testing, transactional testing, because we only looked at what we could from a county perspective, that's where our scope says we only looked at executive agencies. However, once it gets here and it's being processed here through our HR, payroll people, or through Lee's area, we looked at 100%. But if there was some detailed testing that needed to be done on payroll records, we only had access to the payroll records for those within the scope of our jurisdiction and authority. And so that's all we could limit our testing to. So if there was something for Adam's board, just to be, we did not look at that. We could not, because we didn't have the authority to audit them at that level. But if it came through payroll and it hit the centralized process that happens here, so to the extent that they made sure that the paycheck was correct and all of that, from Lee's perspective, we looked at that. But the detail underneath it, we did not. We could not, because we didn't have access to those records. So to the extent that we had access to records, they were included in our detailed population sets where we did detailed testing. To the extent that they did not, we only were able to include those populations when we did our higher level generalized testing at the centralized functions here at the county. Questions about that?
I just have a comment. I mean, the business service managers for each of those agencies should also be the ones auditing that payroll, looking for spikes. So I agree with what you're saying. We're doing the best we can, but management has a responsibility as well to look at that. I know when I was over sanitary and all those other ones, I would look at that. I'd look for the spikes, and we flagged them. But it's not perfect. I agree with you, so.
Yeah. Okay, so then, again, as it relates to the year, we looked at 2020. There definitely were areas which we identified from a control perspective that needed to be addressed to because they would impact 21, 22. But I will say this, Lee Tucker and her team were on it. There were a lot of things that had already occurred in 2020 that she had already fixed or had a question about. And we have these conversations, right, Lee, from time to time. Lee will call me up and say, Monica, I have a concern about this. What are your thoughts? So there's definitely active management of risk as it relates to payroll and other areas that come into Lee's jurisdiction. So she's definitely managing risk and mitigating risk from the fiscal office, and my hat's off to them. I thank her so much for her diligence in that. So there are a lot of areas we had to identify because it came up in our testing, but some of them were already resolved. But there are still some open areas that they're going to be working on. They have the report. They're going through it with a fine-tooth comb. They've already come back, asked questions. So we have their attention. They're listening. And even with the new process, so to your point, yes, the process that we looked at was before full implementation of ERP, but some of that stuff went away with it, and some of it, to some extent, some new things may have been created. So we're looking at that as well. Lee's team is looking at that. The findings and the recovery. So stemming from the initial finding for recovery that resulted in this audit for Paul Waller, we have been in touch with the law department working. And then subsequent to that, because of that work, they've had some other kind of recovery issues around payroll that they have come back and asked for my insight and help and assistance with. So based upon those touch points, we have been kind of effectively developing a collaborative approach to trying to develop a solution to this recovery. And what I have done is I've actually provided a very detailed recommendation to them. We're going to be doing, and my suggestion was that we work in a subcommittee environment with them. After the holidays, I've already sent out an email. After the holidays, we'll be meeting to talk and identified. So Lee's part of that team, Greg Huth's part of that team. I think I made Greg Huth the executive sponsor. He has agreed to do that. But we are going to be establishing, I hope, a formal recovery process for the county that probably is a two-tiered approach that also puts us in compliance with some of the legal things that the county's been dealing with on that end in terms of some litigation relative to how they try to recover items. So the committee will be kept abreast, but there is a currently work being done and completed, and we'll move forward with developing a formalized process that the county will have in place to address any findings or recoveries relative to payroll or anything else.
So just for the sake of time, to try to get through this agenda, so at least from my perspective, I think you addressed it. You can keep us up to date on how if and how is the county pursuing the overpayments that were identified in the report. I'm interested in understanding if management is planning on doing 100% review, not the sampling that you guys did, but the 100% review that you did, and whether or not there's discussion by county management about looking at the additional year that you did not look at, the 2021 year, if I have my years right. So those are my specific items that at least I'm interested in it, and maybe the committee is. Okay. Any other discussion on the? Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I would recommend inviting the business managers from the outside agencies as part of the review team with Greg Huth and others, because the fiscal officer is correct, right? And if there's overpayments, they're part of that process. So I think they would be. Yep. And as we know with Paul Waller's overpayment, there was potential for other managers to be held accountable for the overpayment, not just the individual receiving the dollar. So I think inviting them as part of the process. It can't just fall on the fiscal office reviewing 8,500 payroll registries every 2 weeks. So I would invite them as part of the process.
Okay.
All righty. So the next item, and Monica, we do have to streamline this a bit. So the IT risk assessment, I just wanted to make sure that as an audit committee, we understood what ultimately was going to be the deliverable associated with that work. So I think you guys sent over the scope document and the deliverable, but just a couple of words associated with that.
So the IT risk assessment, this particular risk assessment is just really to look at the ITGC, which is IT General Controls, and really establish, I guess, a further, give us an understanding of where we are from an ITGC perspective, whether we have any gaps, and if so, make recommendations as to how we can fill those gaps from a control perspective. And to the extent that they identify controls in place, just provide a testing plan. That's Synapse, that's it. No real testing going to be done there, just a risk assessment, assessing the risk. Do we have controls? If we have a gap, a recommendation. If we have controls, a recommendation of what they think the test plan should be on a go-forward basis to test the effectiveness of that control.
So everybody understand that? Because I certainly don't. I'm not an IT general controls person. So it's, everybody good? Anybody more discussion on that one? So what happens with the deliverable?
So what happens with the deliverable is it would give us then additional work to do. It gives management additional work to do. They would need to, if there's a gap, talk about what they can do to put it in place, whether they're going to accept the recommendation or not. Once that's put into place, then there would need to be testing of those controls. For the ones that they identified there are controls and there's testing, they're going to give us a testing plan, and then we would then further do an ITGC audit where we would test that. I think we have the in-house expertise to perform the testing part of it with the test plan that they provide. So that would be an audit for the next period. And then subsequent to that, typically what will wind up happening is you have these different, probably smaller audits that come out that say you need to look at backup and recovery, or you need to look at your software implementation, or change management processes. So then it would be these smaller type audits that we would be then placing on the audit plan in subsequent years for us to perform.
And when do you think you'll be selecting the vendor?
So yes, we've had a little bit of a hang up with this. We had hoped to have a vendor selected by now for this meeting. What happened is we were unaware to us there was a DEI component placed on this, and because of the nature of the work, it really didn't lend itself to that. And so we came back, we got vendors that did not meet that. And so we had to run it back through for a rebid, and we were able to get the DEI component removed. And so now it's out for rebid, and they have until 12/31 to provide their responses. So we hope to select somebody early next year.
Any other questions on the audit, the IT general controls project? Okay. So the next item is the PRC public records request denial. So again, just as a brief summary, there was a request by internal audit to involve the PRC in the audit that internal audit was doing primarily on the HR department. They initially declined to participate because they referenced that they didn't need the assistance, the language in the prosecutor's opinion. Then we went back to the PRC and did a public records request, figuring that would kind of force them to provide the records. My interpretation of that opinion is they denied it because they thought it was unnecessary. I'm not using the right terminology, Mark will correct me, either unnecessary and or not specific enough. And so that's generally where it stands. It is impacting internal audit's ability to get through a couple of their audits. So with that, Monica, just a couple of whatever you want to say on it.
Yes, so as it relates to that, I just like to, we're going to inform the audit committee of the impact to the audit. given that we don't have information or ability to get information from the PRC in certain areas. And so there is going to be quite a bit of impact in several areas. So just high level, the PRC, as background, they have authority over the responsibility for resolution and dissolution of all personnel matters, responsibility for reviewing and auditing compliance with federal, state, and local laws. They review, audit, report, and make recommendations regarding certain personnel matters. And they have sole responsibility for the civil service testing for initial and promotional appointments. So when we're doing an HR review that is centered on recruitment, hiring, and retention, obviously the work that they do is supportive of that. Additionally, when we do an audit that is about HR compliance, certainly since they have a role, a critical role in compliance, what they do plays a part in that. So as it relates to employee recruitment, hiring, and retention, we're going to be not able to reach conclusions on the effectiveness of civil service exams, whether they are appropriate. Some of the concern has been that there may be a mismatch between job descriptions and the civil service exam. A good example of that is cashiering and the treasurer's office. Some have indicated that that exam can only be passed by people who have a really high mathematical aptitude, and so that they think there may be a mismatch with the exam versus what is needed to perform the job. We won't be able to look at that, at the effectiveness of civil service exams in terms of the appropriateness or matching of job description. We also won't be able to assess the efficiency of scheduling, conducting, and certifying results of civil exams, which gets to some of our DEI things. A lot of that is geared towards us getting that information, and then the timeline for how jobs. That's another issue, right? Is from a hiring perspective, a lot of employees are, that's something that all employees right now are having issues with, is hiring people. So the quicker we can hire somebody, the better. So somebody works for the government, wants to work for us, it takes us maybe 3 to 6 months to get them on board. Why is that? Part of that is the civil service exam, and if we're not able to look at and see where there can be improvements in that process, then we really can't offer, constructive recommendations to kind of cut that timeline down, to maybe get people from application to employment, to cut that down. So that is also an area of retention. The assessment of the performance management related to disciplinary actions. There's an appeal process through the PRC. Now, we would not be looking at any of the decisions or anything like that, but just looking at the timing and the statistics that come out of that, right? So we can't really do that. HR compliance. This is another area. The denial impacts us in the areas of assessing monitoring controls. There are monitoring controls that they perform. We have no idea. We can't say how well, how frequent, that such is being done. And then assess of EEO compliance. Oh, it's actually ADA. It's actually ADA. The ADA requires reasonable accommodations be provided during the conducting of a civil service exam. We can't really conclude upon that because that's part of what PRC does, and we don't have that information. So definitely areas. What we are going to be doing is, to the extent that we can, we will continue with our work, which we have been doing. And if there's a scope limitation based upon our inability to get the information from the PRC, I would like to say that when I met with the PRC and their board, their chairman, definitely said that they would be willing to cooperate with specific questions and things that we have. So we're definitely going to hold them to it. We're still going to try to get information from them. We're going to reach back out to them to the extent we identify things that are in their ballpark and camp that maybe we can get some additional information on. We're going to keep trying to develop that collaborative relationship with them. They've indicated that they are interested in having that collaborative relationship, just don't want to be audited. So again, we're going to continue to do what we can do, but it may result in scope limitations, and that will show up in our report.
Any questions? You want to ask any of the questions that you sent in the email?
The only point is that I honestly don't remember where the committee agreed to send the public records request. If it happened, I apologize, I don't remember. I'm not sure a public records request going forward is the ideal method of getting information. And if we feel compelled to issue another public records request, I encourage that legal counsel review it in advance, because several of the arguments that were posed in their response could have been addressed ahead of time, like the overbroad issue, and I think there was one other. So that was that's just my comment and recommendation.
Certainly, and I do appreciate that, but I would like to say that if you looked at the public records request, they, in their response, they, as rightfully they should, are giving out broad, general things, but it was very specific. It was not overly broad. It was limited. So we have an argument back to what they're saying. What they're saying we should not be taken as the truth, or that it's a correct finding of such. So it was, I think, an appropriate, like some of what they're saying I disagree with, but I am not a legal person, and that's up to this committee to determine if they would like to have legal go back. But I do believe that it was written in an appropriate way in which it should have been able to be responded to. But of course, if you don't want to respond to something, you can throw up any legal response that you feel you have, and that is what I feel they did. Each and everything that they thought they could put up, they did put up in their response.
So I'm not in favor of getting into a legal battle.
I am not either. I mean, the only thing I will say with that is I'm in agreement with you is, public records requests, if you're going to go that route, then maybe you need to consider whether you want to go the distance, which the distance would be going back if they say no. But at this point, I think there has been damage done to the relationship, but I'm still going to do my best to try to work and be collaborative in that respect.
Monica, I think to Sal's original question, I don't necessarily agree that this committee authorized a public records request. I think what was discussed at the last committee meeting was that these are public records. I don't believe the committee decided to go forward with a public records request.
We could probably go back, but I do believe that you did request, you did make the request.
I would recommend looking back at the video, because I did.
Okay,
and
okay.
I asked you if they were public records. I didn't say go forward with a public records request. So I'm okay that we did. But we didn't agree as a committee to go forward with the public records request.
My recollection, I'll go back to the minutes, but my recollection in the minutes, I think, reflect that you did, but I will go back and look.
I went to the tape, so.
Okay, you did.
Yeah, so
Okay.
it might be in the minutes, but what was actually said,
Okay.
I asked if they were public records. Are we asking, would we need public records? And you said they were public records, so. But there wasn't a decision to move forward with the.
I will say that subsequent to that, I got emails asking if we had sent the request, so.
From audit committee members?
Yes.
Me, because
Okay.
I thought we had also
Okay.
advised them to do.
No, I don't think we officially took any, so. Mr. Chair, too, if I could just talk a little bit about the response from the PRC. I agree, I don't think we need to argue back and forth and ask Mark to draft something to counter probably what, his coworkers drafted as a response. But there were a couple things in here that I think just are completely false and incorrect, even to begin with. I don't care what the intent of a public records request is, it doesn't matter. I think Mark would agree with that, that the reason why someone is asking for a public records request does not matter. And I just want to, I think for the record, confirm that's accurate. I mean, you don't even have to state your name if you're asking for a public record, so.
You don't have to state the reason why either.
And, I mean, they spent a whole paragraph plus arguing about the intent, and I'm kind of disappointed that they put that. They also used they're disturbed at the public records request. I'm sorry that the PRC is disturbed that they had to, as a public body, had to get a public records request, so hopefully they can get past their being disturbed. And I don't agree that Monica, even if we didn't agree to it or not, I think Monica has the ability to, as a director of internal audit or as a citizen of wherever, to ask for a public records request. So I don't agree with it's an improper attempt at a public records request. I don't want to get into merits of if it's overly broad or not, but those were just kind of the three things from the letter that I strongly disagree with. I was a little, quite frankly, surprised that was even included in the response, and they didn't just focus on it being overly broad. I just felt, again, I don't want to get into back and forth with the PRC, but those three things were out of line in my opinion.
I want to kind of wrap this up, but, so, I mean, I just want a couple of comments and reflect in the minutes that I do respect the work that the PRC does on behalf of the county. You know, it's pretty important, but I am disappointed in their responses, both in that opinion that they provided, plus in their initial unwillingness to participate in the audit. And their response and their inaction is now not allowing this committee and the internal audit to do their important work. And so, you know, so it's going to be, I guess we decided, there's other options here, but I'm not hearing that there's anybody who wants to continue to push this issue. But, so just write it up as you think is the right way to write it up from a scope limitation perspective. And
I'm a little concerned, I guess, about precedent, and I think some very good points were made, and if we leave it unresponded to, is there an inference we've agreed, I guess would be the concern that I have, and that might hamper our ability with in other requests, other affiliates of the county to make our case, and might they rely back on PRC's response that we didn't challenge. So I put a lot of ifs in that sentence, but I am somewhat concerned just letting it lie makes a statement to others that they shouldn't take our request too seriously, particularly as was pointed out if some of their rationale in here is just flawed on its face. That said, I'm not sure what my recommendation is as to what we should do.
Maybe if I can just offer some thoughts. I think by pursuing it and getting in to a tit for tat, we would create a precedent that we might not like. And by leaving it hanging out there, I don't think we established that, but maybe one avenue would be to say, I withdraw the request, I disagree with your response, however, we'll leave that for another day and I withdraw my request at this time. At least then there's something to provide a temporary closure to the question.
The last part, they've already denied it. They've already denied their request. I mean, I don't see the value in that. I like everything up to we withdraw the request because they've denied the request. So I at least acknowledgement that we received their letter. We disagree with it. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. I think.
I like that text.
just to Monica's point on the relationships and the amenability of conducting an audit through public records request, it probably isn't the, a great way to conduct an audit of another unit, but the support of the unit being requested for the records. And I would be interested in Monica's view on maintaining or building that relationship with, I mean, what do you think is the appropriate way to preserve the argument, but still try to have an open, a reached out arm to assist in any way?
I think, to Keith's point, it shouldn't be left open, that the committee does need to respond to ensure that you are properly protected from liability, that you didn't do your job. So the response, but I think I would, in doing this audit, there are going to be some areas, we already see them, that are going, irrespective of whether they allowed us to audit them or not, that are going to impact them. There are going to be some recommendations. My goal here is to go back and work with Rebecca and the chairman of that committee and see if we can reestablish a collaborative work relationship, which he has said they are. I mean, they've been. It's really kind of, like you said, surprising because they've been very collaborative in their approach. When HR has had some issues with them in the past, the executive, in terms of, some things that they were doing. So I just think that they're, it just needs time to work through. And, I'm going to do my best. That's my job. I'm going to try my best to ensure that they know that this is something that we are doing for the good of all, and that it's not an I got you, that we're willing to work with them in any findings, because we do have some findings. I believe we will have some that may impact them. We're going to work through with them irrespective of them not being audited. This is not going to be a report that kind of just blasts them. I don't believe in that. To the extent that we have to put out our findings, we'll put out our findings, but we'll do so in the most constructive manner that we can.
So I have a suggestion, I'm sorry, Mike. In my mind, I'm envisioning the letter to go, thank you for the response, although we respectfully disagree. We look forward to the collaboration between the DIA and the PRC in the future for the benefit of all the residents of Cuyahoga County.
Perfect.
Coming from Monica?
Who was it addressed to? Was it addressed to the committee or Monica?
I believe Monica sent the request.
Yeah.
And I believe the response was
From the
addressed
commission.
to Director Houston.
Yeah. So I will draft that and send it to you for your review before I send it out.
Okay.
Definitely will send it to Mark.
All right.
And I presume that it's likely that our final report will indicate in some fashion that they didn't comply with our request. So that will be out there.
So I
at
was
the
not
end of the
going
day.
to go to that level of detail. I was just going to say we had a scope limitation in that we were not able to access. I was not going to specifically say they denied a public record request unless you believe I should. Huh? It is a fact, but it's a fact that may not.
I see Appendix A right here, but
I want to kind of put, so it explains, I think you should put some language in there and do your best to, because it explains the scope limitation. Otherwise, you can't explain the scope. Why do you have a scope limitation? Well, because they didn't provide the information. So, but again, I want to try to put this one to closure and get into the rest of the agenda. So, so if you could draft a letter, send it over to us, and then I do think you should put some appropriately worded language actually in the report itself that kind of explains, what was provided or what wasn't provided to us based upon the request. All right. So I'm hoping we can skip over the encumbrance, the OBM encumbrance timing because it's not relevant.
It is relevant.
Okay, then you
I'm
got a minute.
so sorry.
1 minute.
Lee kind of talked about this when she talked about the issue with the audit, but our audit was going to be to look at that process to try to prevent the continuous exception that occurs on the external audit relative to encumbrance and appropriations. When we met and we started kicking off this audit, what we found out is that processes have been put into place, but what was put into place that should have been done this year actually did not get done. Mike mentioned it, that there was some hiccups in their internal processes, so we know it didn't happen, so there's really no need for us to look at it if it didn't happen, right? So then all we're really left with is what they're planning to do, which won't happen until first quarter of the year for 22, right? So, and for 23.
Talking about the certification, we still have time to go back and update the certification year. But if you, but are you talking about something else?
So it's a couple of different things. So you have the certification, but then remember you talked about the process of where you unencumber.
So we plan to do that before the end of the year as
Okay, so, but that's before the end of the year. So we're at December, you haven't done it yet, right?
well. When I say before the end of the year, I mean before we close.
Right, which will be in January.
Lee, for the live stream, I think, could you,
okay.
just to pick up the sound?
Tentatively, we're gonna close January the 10th. So the schedule that we have drafted internally allows for the decertification of encumbrances on December 31st, which is a Saturday, but we do plan to come in on Saturday to get it done.
Right, but for us to audit that process, it would have had to be done. So we can't complete our audit by December 31st if they've not done the work before December 31st. So what we can do is, because we've already done a lot of the work in that respect, is look at what you plan to do and look at it from a consulting perspective versus an audit. So we can't audit, right? Audit would be looking at what you've done, but we can look to see if how you plan to address it, whether we think it's viable and that this will not be, to Mike's words before, an issue going forward. What would the committee like us to do? Hold off to do the audit, which will be next year, or we can do the consulting project, which we could do before December 31st. We can, so.
Why don't you do the consulting work and then decide as you're finalizing the audit plan next year whether or not it fits in your audit plan for next year.
Okay,
You'll audit it.
will do.
Okay.
All right, great.
So can you set something up
I
with
will.
the team and Shantae as well?
Absolutely, yeah,
All right.
okay, okay.
Current emerging risks, anything?
Nothing for that
Okay.
at this point.
All right.
Mhm.
We do need to schedule, unfortunately, we have to reschedule the first meeting for next year, but we'll do that when we come back. Who has to leave at noon from the audit committee?
Keith.
Okay. All right. Can you stay a little bit longer?
A little bit longer.
Okay. All right. So I want to go to executive session. It's going to bounce back to item 5. So all meetings of the Cuyahoga County Audit Committee are open to the public under the Open Ohio Meetings Act, where the committee may go into executive session during a meeting for specifically authorized purposes. During executive session, the committee confers outside of the hearing of the public, but may not make any decisions about any matters in executive session. All final decisions are made in public. So the committee will go into executive session this afternoon to discuss matters pertaining to a public employee. Is that good enough? Matters pertaining to employment. So we need a motion, or what do we need? A second? Okay, then we need a roll call?
Okay, Michael Abuzerol,
Yes.
Keith Liebman, Trevor McLear, and Salvador Talrico.
Yes.
Okay, so if just the members of the audit committee and attorneys could stay. And then I don't know how you disassemble the language? Okay. So we need to, should I read the whole thing again? Yeah. Okay. Employment, employment.
Mr. Chairman, if we could just amend the motion to go into executive session, suggesting that the grounds for executive session is the appointment and employment of a public employee.
Okay. So all meetings of the Cuyahoga County Audit Committee are open to the public under the Ohio Open Meetings Act. However, the committee may go into executive session during a meeting for specifically authorized purposes. During executive session, the committee confers outside of the hearing of the public, but may not make any decisions about any matters in executive session. All public decisions are made in public. The committee will go into executive session this afternoon to discuss appointment and employment of a public employee. So we need a motion to. Second?
Second.
Okay,
Roll call, Chairman Michael Buzerall,
yes.
Trevor McLear. Keith Lippman, sorry. Salvador Torrico.
We're good, okay. So we are reconvening the meeting of the committee, and we are now back on the record. I do want to jump to item 6F, to discuss and approve the remote work policy. I think we have a motion.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve the remote work location telecommuting draft policy that was in the packet with the following amendment near the end of the document, where it currently reads, RWL privileges may be revoked as operational needs arise at any time, including under the following conditions. I'd like to amend that to read, RWL privileges may be revoked at any time and for any reason, not limited to the following conditions.
So, so all in favor of approving the remote work policy as conveyed by Sal, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we're done.
Chair,
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
did you want to say something?
No.
Really? Okay. I would like to make a motion then, just because it's a new policy, that the committee. Sorry. Because of the policy that was just adopted, that the audit committee authorize the director to work remote as needed, contingent upon following the policy through April of 2023. And that would give us enough time for the next committee meeting. So it would be just contingent on the director following the guidelines in the committee, or in the policy, I apologize, through April of 2023.
So all in favor of approving? Okay. All in favor of approving, say aye.
Aye.
All right, perfect. All right,
I just want to clarify that that includes providing us the bulleted items of rationale by,
Yeah, contingent on the required policy, in the items in the policy.
thank you.
And then that will get us through, hopefully, our reschedule of the first quarter audit committee. So hopefully we have it done by April.
so item 8, public comment unrelated to the agenda, so there's nobody here from the public, so if you can skip by that. Item 9, again, we have to reschedule the next meeting. I don't know if we want to try to do it now.
Sorry, I did look at the calendar in terms of the availability of resources here. Looks like the 23rd was good. I think Chairman Abuzaral, the 23rd was good for you. March 23rd, that's a Thursday, same time from 9 to 12.
I would say, obviously, by then we'll have a new executive. I think we should also confirm with his calendar as well before we set it. It works for me, but I think before we set the date, we should.
So tentatively, it works for you. I will see if I can work with, I think Laura's definitely on the transition team, but, well, Eric, I think, is his chief of staff too, so I'll work with them to see if we can get him on calendar. If we cannot, do you want to hold up the meeting to work with his, or how would you direct me to proceed? We can just do that later through email, that's fine.
Just hope that it works for now.
Yeah, I hope that it works, okay.
For all the other audit committee members, it works, the 23rd? Keith, Sal, Mark.
Brendan, you'll be okay after St. Patrick's Day? That'll give you a couple days to, okay, just want to, Mr. Chambers, I want to make sure you guys can recover, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so we did a motion to adjourn?
So move.
All right, all in favor of adjourning?
Aye. Aye.
50 minutes late, say aye. Aye, all right, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Happy holidays, everyone. Thank you.
Did she say it?
You guys, thank you.